The evening wind carried dust and the smell of coal smoke across the wooden platform of Dry Creek Station. Wade Bennett stood with his back against a support beam, hat pulled low enough that shadows covered most of his face. He'd been standing there for 40 minutes, watching the horizon where the track disappeared into the orange haze of sunset. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and his jaw was tight enough to ache. He wasn't nervous. Wade Bennett didn't do nervous. He did practical. He did necessary. And marrying a woman he'd never met, whose letters had been polite and careful and gave away almost nothing, was both. The ranch needed a woman's hand. That was just fact. 3 years of running Black Ridge alone had taught him that a man could survive on burnt coffee and stubbornness, but he couldn't build anything that lasted. The house was falling apart. The books were a disaster. Half his ranch hands were robbing him blind, and he was too exhausted to notice which half. So he'd placed an advertisement, and Clara Whitmore had answered. Her letters had been short. She wrote about weather and books and asked careful questions about Montana Territory that made it clear she'd never been west of Philadelphia. She didn't write about family. She didn't write about why a woman with good penmanship and obvious education would answer an ad from a cattleman she'd never met. Wade hadn't pushed. Everyone on the frontier was running from something. The train whistle screamed across the valley, and Wade straightened. His heart kicked once, hard, against his ribs. Then he locked it down and waited. The locomotive rolled into the station, trailing black smoke and the screech of brakes. It wasn't a passenger train. This was freight and mail, with a single passenger car hooked on the back like an afterthought. Dry Creek wasn't the kind of place people traveled to. It was the kind of place people ended up when they ran out of track. The conductor swung down first, calling something to the station master that Wade didn't catch. Then the passenger door opened, and Clara Whitmore stepped onto the platform. Wade saw 3 things in the same instant. First, she was small. Smaller than he'd expected, thin in a way that said she'd been skipping meals long before she boarded the train. Her dress was dark gray, travel-stained, and patched at the elbows. She carried one leather suitcase that looked older than she was. Second, she was younger than her letters suggested. Mid-20s, maybe. Dark hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. Pale skin, narrow shoulders. Third, she was crying. Not quiet tears. Not the kind of emotion a woman might hide behind a handkerchief and pretend was dust in her eyes. Clara Whitmore stood on the platform of Dry Creek Station with tears running openly down her face, and she didn't even try to wipe them away. The platform went silent. Wade heard it happen, the way conversations stopped mid-sentence, the way the station master's wife sucked in a breath, the way boots scraped on wood as men turned to look. In a town like Dry Creek, where everyone knew everyone's business and most people's secrets, a crying woman was blood in the water. Clara seemed to realize it a moment too late. Her head came up and her eyes went wide. She looked across the platform, saw the faces turn toward her, and froze. Wade moved before he thought about it. He crossed the platform in 6 strides, took the suitcase from her hand, and said, "Miss Whitmore." She turned toward him so fast she nearly tripped. Up close, he could see that her eyes were red, her face was blotchy, and she was shaking. "Mr. Bennett?" Her voice cracked halfway through his name. "That's right." He kept his voice low, even. "Wagon's just outside. Let's go." She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, then closed it, nodded. He saw her throat work as she swallowed. Wade turned and started walking. After a moment, he heard her footsteps behind him. Quick, uneven, like she was struggling to keep up. He didn't slow down. The faster they got off this platform, the less the town would have to talk about. But he already knew it was too late. By morning, every person in Dry Creek would know that Wade Bennett's mail-order bride had arrived in tears. The wagon was hitched outside the station, and Wade's horse, an ill-tempered gray named Brutus, was already trying to chew through the reins. Wade tossed Clara's suitcase into the back, then turned to help her up. She was staring at the wagon like it might bite her. "You ever ridden in a wagon before?" Wade asked. "Of course I have." She said it too fast, too defensive. Then quieter. "Just not one like this." It was a ranch wagon. Flatbed, no springs, wheels that hadn't been greased in a month. It looked like what it was. A tool for moving hay and fence posts, not people. Wade held out his hand. "It'll get you there." She looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. Her fingers were cold even through her gloves. Wade pulled her up onto the bench, then climbed up beside her. He took the reins, released the brake, and got the wagon moving before she could change her mind. They rolled out of Dry Creek in silence. The town disappeared behind them quickly. It wasn't much of a town to begin with. A main street, a general store, a saloon, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse on weekdays. Most of the buildings looked like they'd been thrown together in an afternoon and left to weather into something permanent. Beyond the town, there was nothing but grassland and sky. Clara sat beside him with her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. She'd stopped crying, but her breathing was still uneven. Wade let the silence stretch for a mile, then another. Finally, he said, "You want to tell me what happened?" She flinched. She stopped. Started again. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I thought I'd have more time to compose myself before the whole town saw you fall apart." Her head whipped toward him. For a second, he thought she might be angry. Then her face crumpled, and she looked away fast. "Yes." Wade watched the road. "Too late for that." "I know." Her voice was barely a whisper. "So what happened?" She was quiet for so long he thought she wasn't going to answer. The wagon rattled over a rut, and she grabbed the edge of the seat to steady herself. Then she said, "I was hoping I wouldn't have to tell you until we'd at least spoken properly." "We're speaking now." "Yes, but—" She took a breath, let it out slowly. "Mr. Bennett, the reason I left Philadelphia wasn't in my letters. I figured—" She turned to look at him again, and this time there was something like surprise in her eyes. "You did?" "Nobody comes out here because things are going well." She almost smiled. It died before it reached her mouth. "No, I suppose not." The road curved around a low hill, and Black Ridge Ranch came into view in the distance, a collection of buildings that looked small and isolated against the huge Montana sky. Clara stared at it, and Wade couldn't tell if she was relieved or terrified. "There was a man in Philadelphia," she said suddenly. "His name was Gerald Whitfield. His father owned half the textile mills in the city, and Gerald was used to getting what he wanted." Wade's hands tightened on the reins. He didn't say anything. He decided he wanted me. Clara's voice had gone flat. "I was working as a governess for a family his father did business with. Gerald started paying attention, sending flowers, showing up at the house when I took the children to the park. I was polite at first. Then I was firm. Then I was rude. It didn't matter. He wouldn't stop." The wagon hit another rut, harder this time. Clara gripped the seat tighter. "One night he cornered me at a party the family had taken me to. He'd been drinking. He tried to kiss me, and I pushed him away. He grabbed my wrist hard enough to bruise, and I—" She stopped, swallowed. "I slapped him. In front of half of Philadelphia society." Wade kept his eyes on the road, but every muscle in his body had gone tense. "His father was furious," Clara continued. "Not at Gerald, at me. Within a week, I'd lost my position. The family I worked for said they couldn't keep someone of questionable character. Other families refused to hire me. People I'd known for years crossed the street to avoid me. Gerald's father made sure everyone knew that I'd thrown myself at his son and then attacked him when he rejected me." "That's a lie," Wade said. "Of course it's a lie." There was sudden heat in her voice. "But it didn't matter. His word against mine, and his word was worth more. By the end of the month, I couldn't find work anywhere in the city. My landlady told me to leave. I had nowhere to go, no family, no money, no references, nothing." She stopped talking. The only sound was the creak of the wagon and the wind moving through the grass. "So I answered your advertisement," Clara said quietly, "because I had no other options. And I should have told you all of this before I got on the train, but I was afraid you'd tell me not to come, and I had nowhere else to go." Wade pulled the wagon to a stop. Clara went very still beside him. He sat there for a moment, looking out at the land that stretched empty and endless in every direction. Then he turned to face her. "You think I care what some Philadelphia jackass says about you?" She blinked. What?" "Out here. We've got drought and blizzards and cattle thieves. We've got men who'll shoot you over a water dispute and wolves that'll take down a full-grown steer. You think I give a damn about gossip from 2,000 miles away?" Clara was staring at him like he'd started speaking a different language. "You lied in your letters," Wade said. "That's true." But you came anyway. You got on a train alone, traveled across the country to a place you'd never been, to marry a man you'd never met. That takes guts. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. You made yours. He picked up the reins again. Now I'm making mine. You want to go back to Dry Creek and get on the next train east? I'll take you. No questions, no judgment. But if you're staying, we do this proper. We get married, you work the ranch, and we don't talk about Philadelphia again. Understood? She opened her mouth, closed it. He could see her struggling with something, pride maybe, or shame, or just the shock of being believed. Finally she said, Why? Why what? Why would you marry me knowing I brought scandal with me? Wade started the wagon moving again. Because out here, the only thing that matters is whether you can survive. Everything else is just noise. They rode the rest of the way to Black Ridge in silence. The ranch house looked worse than Clara had imagined, which was saying something because she'd imagined it would be bad. It was a low, sprawling structure made of rough-cut timber that had weathered to gray. The porch sagged on one side. 2 of the front windows had cracks running through them. The roof looked like it leaked in at least 3 places. Behind the house, there was a barn that was in even worse shape, a chicken coop that was held together mostly by hope, and a series of corrals where a dozen horses stood watching the wagon approach with mild interest. Wade pulled the wagon up to the front of the house and set the brake. He climbed down, grabbed Clara's suitcase, and walked toward the door without waiting to see if she'd follow. She followed. Inside was, well, it was about what she'd expected. One main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. A wood stove that looked older than Wade, a table with 2 chairs, both different heights, shelves that were mostly empty, a door that presumably led to a bedroom, and another that led to what Clara desperately hoped was not the only water source. You'll have the bedroom, Wade said, setting her suitcase down just inside the door. I'll sleep out here. Clara looked around the room again. There was no couch, no cot, just a hard floor and a single wool blanket draped over one of the chairs. Mr. Bennett, I can't. You can and you will. He said it without looking at her. We'll go into town tomorrow and find the circuit judge. He comes through once a month, and we're lucky. He's here this week. We'll make it legal, and then we'll figure out the rest. The rest? How this works. He finally turned to look at her. I'm not expecting, this doesn't have to be... He stopped. Tried again. What I'm saying is, we'll take this slow. You need time to adjust, I understand that. Clara felt heat rise in her face. That's very considerate. It's practical. He moved toward the door. There's a pump out back for water. Privy's behind the barn. I've got 2 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. You'll meet them tomorrow. They're rough, but they're good men. Mostly. Mostly? They drink too much and they're lazy, but they haven't stolen from me yet. As far as I know. He put his hat back on. I've got to check on the livestock before dark. You should rest. We'll talk more in the morning. He was gone before she could respond. Clara stood alone in the middle of Wade Bennett's house and tried not to cry again. She'd promised herself on the train that she was done crying, that she'd used up all her tears somewhere between Pennsylvania and Montana, and when she arrived she'd be strong and capable and ready to start over. That plan had lasted exactly as long as it took for the train doors to open. Now she was here, in a house that looked like it might collapse in a strong wind, about to marry a man who seemed to think kindness meant pointing out where the privy was located. Clara sat down on one of the mismatched chairs and put her face in her hands. She didn't cry, but it was close. Tiquette. Wade checked every animal twice, which meant it was full dark by the time he made it back to the house. He could see lamplight in the window, which meant Clara was still awake. He thought about going inside, decided against it. Instead, he headed for the bunkhouse. His 2 ranch hands, Pete and Samuel, were playing cards by lantern light when Wade pushed the door open. They both looked up, and Pete's face split into a grin that Wade immediately didn't like. Well, Pete said, how's married life? I'm not married yet. But you saw her. Pete leaned forward. Is it true she was crying at the station? Wade gave him a look that could freeze water. Where'd you hear that? Tommy Briggs was picking up supplies when the train came in. He said your bride stepped off the platform bawling like a baby, said half the town saw it. Samuel, who was older and smarter than Pete, kicked him under the table. "Shut up." "What?" "I'm just asking." "You're being an idiot," Samuel said. He looked at Wade. "Don't listen to him, boss. Town gossip doesn't mean anything." "Town gossip means everything out here," Wade said quietly. "You know that." Samuel didn't argue because it was true. Wade crossed his arms. "She's staying. We're getting married tomorrow. And if either of you has a problem with that, you can draw your pay and be gone by morning." Pete and Samuel exchanged a look. "No problem, boss," Samuel said. "Good." Wade turned toward the door, then stopped. "And if I hear either of you repeating what Tommy Briggs said, we're going to have a different kind of conversation. Clear?" "Clear," they both said. Wade left. Behind him, he heard Pete say, "What'd I say?" and Samuel's reply, "For once in your life, just shut your damn mouth." Clara didn't sleep. She lay in Wade Bennett's bed, which was narrow and hard and smelled like leather and smoke, and stared at the ceiling. Through the thin wall, she could hear him moving around in the main room, the scrape of a chair, the creak of floorboards. Eventually, silence. She wondered if he was sleeping on the floor. She wondered if she should feel guilty about that. She wondered what she'd gotten herself into. In Philadelphia, she'd imagined Montana as something romantic. Wide open spaces and fresh starts, and the kind of freedom that came from being somewhere no one knew your name. The reality was harsher, colder, lonelier, but Wade Bennett had looked her in the eye and told her that scandal didn't matter out here, that survival was all that counted. Clara wanted to believe him. She closed her eyes and tried to sleep and told herself that tomorrow everything would make more sense. She was wrong about that, but she wouldn't know it until morning. Clara woke to the sound of something crashing in the next room. She sat up fast, heart hammering, momentarily confused about where she was. Then it came back. The train station, the tears, Wade Bennett's face when he'd told her scandal didn't matter out here, the hard bed beneath her, Montana. Another crash, followed by cursing. Clara threw off the blanket and crossed to the door, opening it just enough to peer through. Wade was standing in the middle of the main room, surrounded by what looked like the contents of every cabinet in the kitchen. Pots, pans, plates, cups, all spread across the table and floor in no particular order. He was holding a coffee pot in one hand and staring at it like it had personally offended him. "Mr. Bennett?" He turned so fast he nearly dropped the pot. "You're awake." Something fell. Everything fell. He set the coffee pot down harder than necessary. "I was trying to make breakfast and I opened the cabinet and... Never mind. It doesn't matter." Clara stepped fully into the room, acutely aware that she was still wearing the same dress she'd traveled in. Her hair was coming loose from its pins, and she probably looked exactly like someone who hadn't slept all night. Wade didn't look much better. There were shadows under his eyes, and his jaw was tight with frustration. "Let me help," Clara said. "You don't need to—" "I know I don't need to. I'm offering." She moved past him toward the stove. "Do you have coffee?" "Somewhere." He gestured vaguely at the mess. "Probably." Clara found the coffee tin under a dented pot. She also found approximately 3 months of accumulated grime on every surface she touched, but she kept that observation to herself. Instead, she got the stove going, which took longer than it should have because the damper was stuck, and started water heating. Wade watched her for a moment, then started picking up the fallen dishes. They worked in silence. Clara made coffee that was stronger than she'd normally drink, but seemed about right for a Montana ranch. Wade managed to locate eggs and something that might have once been bacon. By the time the sun was fully up, they had something resembling breakfast on the table. Clara sat down across from Wade and took a careful sip of coffee. It was terrible. She took another sip and pretended it wasn't. "We should leave for town in an hour," Wade said. "Judge Morrison usually holds court at the saloon until noon." "The saloon? It's the biggest building in Dry Creek." He said it like this was perfectly reasonable. "He uses the back room." Clara wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "Mr. Bennett, are you certain about this? About the marriage? Because if you've reconsidered—" "I haven't reconsidered." "But you barely know me. And after yesterday, the whole town will be talking about—" "The whole town's always talking about something." Wade set down his fork. "Look, Miss Whitmore, I'm not good at pretty words. I'm not going to tell you this will be easy or that I'm some kind of hero for marrying you despite your past. The truth is, I need help running this ranch, and you need a place to be. That's the arrangement. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. It wasn't romantic. It wasn't even particularly kind, but it was honest, and Clara found that she preferred honesty to empty reassurances. All right, she said. 1 hour. Wade nodded and went back to his breakfast, and Clara tried not to think about the fact that in a few hours she'd be married to this taciturn stranger who made terrible coffee and apparently didn't believe in cleaning his kitchen. She'd made worse decisions in Philadelphia. Not many, but some. The ride into Dry Creek was quieter than the day before. Wade kept his eyes on the road, and Clara kept hers on the landscape. Endless grass and sky, and nothing else. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt exposed, like there was nowhere to hide if something came looking for you. They reached town just before 10. Wade pulled the wagon up in front of the general store, and Clara felt her stomach twist when she saw the cluster of women on the porch turn to stare. Ignore them, Wade said quietly. Easy for you to say. No, it's not, but do it anyway. He climbed down and came around to help her. This time, when he offered his hand, Clara took it without hesitation. The women on the porch didn't even pretend to look away. Clara heard one of them whisper something that included the word crying, and another one laughed. Clara's face went hot, but she kept her chin up and followed Wade toward the saloon. Inside, the place smelled like whiskey and sawdust and smoke. It was mostly empty this early, just a bartender wiping down glasses and an old man sleeping in the corner. Wade headed straight for a door at the back, knocked once, and pushed it open. Judge Morrison was a thin man with gray hair and spectacles that sat crooked on his nose. He was reviewing papers at a small desk, and he looked up when they entered. Wade Bennett, he said. Heard your mail-order bride arrived yesterday. She did. Wade gestured to Clara. This is Miss Clara Whitmore. We'd like to be married. The judge looked at Clara over his spectacles. His expression was neutral, but Clara could feel him evaluating her, looking for signs of coercion maybe, or insanity. Miss Whitmore, he said, you understand what you're agreeing to? Marriage on the frontier isn't like marriage back east. Divorce is nearly impossible out here. Once you're wed, you're wed. I understand, Clara said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. And you're entering this marriage of your own free will? No one's forcing you? Clara almost laughed. No one was forcing her except circumstance and desperation and the complete absence of any other option. But that wasn't what he was asking. I'm here by choice, she said. Judge Morrison studied her for another moment, then nodded. All right then, let's make this official. The ceremony took less than 5 minutes. The judge read from a book that looked like he'd used it 100 times before. Wade said, I do, like he was agreeing to fix a fence. Clara said, I do, and felt like she was stepping off a cliff. By the power vested in me by Montana Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Judge Morrison closed the book. That'll be $2. Wade paid him, shook his hand, and turned toward the door. Mr. Bennett, the judge said, you might want to kiss your bride. Wade stopped, turned back, looked at Clara like he'd forgotten that was part of the tradition. Clara looked back at him and realized she had no idea what to do. They were married now, legally bound, and they'd never even touched except for him helping her in and out of wagons. Wade crossed the space between them in 2 steps, leaned down, and kissed her cheek. It was quick and awkward and completely chaste. All right, he said, let's go. They left Judge Morrison's office as husband and wife, and Clara felt exactly the same as she had when they'd entered, which seemed wrong somehow, but she didn't have time to dwell on it because the moment they stepped back into the main room of the saloon, she saw the crowd. At least a dozen people had gathered, women from the general store porch, men who'd clearly come from the street, even a few children peering through the window. They all went quiet when Wade and Clara appeared. Well, someone called out, did she go through with it? Wade's jaw tightened. We're married. Anyone got a problem with that? A woman in a blue dress stepped forward. She was older, maybe 50, with sharp eyes and a mouth that looked like it spent a lot of time pursed in disapproval. I'm Margaret Sutton, she said, looking at Clara. I run the boarding house. I heard you arrived yesterday in quite a state. Clara felt Wade tense beside her, but she spoke before he could. That's correct, Mrs. Sutton. The journey was difficult, and I was overwhelmed. I apologize for any spectacle I caused. Margaret Sutton's eyebrows went up slightly, like she'd expected defiance or tears instead of a calm acknowledgement. I see. And you're staying, despite everything? Despite everything, Clara said evenly. There was a long pause. Then Margaret Sutton nodded once, sharply, and stepped back. The crowd began to disperse, some looking disappointed that there hadn't been more drama. Wade took Clara's elbow and steered her toward the door. They made it halfway to the wagon before someone called out, "Hey, Bennett!" Wade turned. A young man Clara didn't recognize was leaning against the general store wall, grinning in a way that made Clara's skin crawl. "That's Tommy Briggs," Wade said quietly. "Ignore him." "Heard your bride's got quite a reputation back east," Tommy called out. "That true?" "Tommy," Wade said, his voice deadly calm. "Walk away. Just asking questions. People are curious about what kind of woman comes all the way out here crying." Wade moved fast. One moment he was standing beside Clara, the next he had Tommy Briggs by the collar, pinned against the store wall. "You want to repeat that?" Wade asked. Tommy's grin faltered. You were just spreading gossip like a bored old woman. That what you do with your time, Tommy? Stand around making up stories about people you don't know?" "I didn't make up nothing. I just said what I saw. What you saw was a woman getting off a train. Everything else is you running your mouth." Wade released him with a slight push. "Do it again, and we'll have a longer conversation. Understood?" Tommy straightened his collar, trying to salvage some dignity. "Sure, Bennett. Whatever you say." Wade returned to Clara and the wagon without another word. He helped her up, climbed in beside her, and got them moving before anyone else could decide to share their opinions. They were a mile out of town before Clara said, "You didn't have to do that." "Yeah, I did. He was just talking. That's how it starts. Just talking. Then it's just rumors. Then it's just everyone believing the worst about you because they've heard it so many times, it must be true." Wade's hands were tight on the reins. "I told you yesterday, out here, you survive or you don't. But you can't survive if the whole town decides you're not worth defending." Clara studied his profile. "Is that what you're doing? Defending me?" "I'm defending my wife," Wade said. "That's different." Clara wasn't sure it was different at all, but she didn't argue. Instead, she watched the prairie roll by and tried to process the fact that she was married. To a man who apparently solved problems by threatening people in the street. She should probably be concerned about that. Instead, she felt something uncomfortably close to relief. Back at Black Ridge Ranch, Clara discovered just how much work running a ranch actually involved. Wade gave her a quick tour that consisted of pointing at buildings and stating their purpose. "That's the barn. That's the bunkhouse where Pete and Samuel sleep. That's the chicken coop, needs repair. That's the smokehouse, also needs repair. That's the root cellar, definitely needs repair. And that," he pointed at a small structure that was literally leaning to one side. "That used to be a storage shed, but now it's mostly a home for mice." "How encouraging," Clara said. Wade almost smiled. "You want encouraging? You married the wrong man." "I'm beginning to understand that." This time he did smile, quick and unexpected. It changed his whole face, made him look younger and less like someone carrying the weight of the entire Montana territory on his shoulders. Then Pete and Samuel emerged from the bunkhouse, and the smile disappeared. "Boys," Wade said, "this is my wife, Clara. Clara, this is Pete and Samuel." Pete was young and wiry, with a cocky grin that reminded Clara of every careless boy she'd ever met. Samuel was older, probably close to 40, with weathered skin and eyes that had seen too much. "Ma'am," Samuel said, removing his hat, "pleased to meet you." Pete just stared. "You're really staying?" "Pete?" Wade said, his voice carrying a warning. "What?" "I'm just surprised is all. Figured she'd take one look at this place and run back to wherever she came from." "Well, I didn't," Clara said sharply. "So you'll have to be disappointed." Pete blinked. Samuel covered his mouth with his hand, but Clara could see he was fighting back a laugh. Wade turned to Clara. "Kitchen needs cleaning. Books need organizing. House needs basically everything. Think you can handle that while I deal with the fences?" "I can handle it," Clara said. "Good." Wade headed toward the barn, calling back over his shoulder, "Pete, Samuel, with me. We've got work to do." The three men disappeared, and Clara was left standing alone in the yard of her new home, surrounded by broken buildings and endless sky. She took a breath, let it out slowly. Then she went inside to start cleaning. The kitchen was worse than she'd thought. It wasn't just dirty, it was layered in dirt, like Wade had been cooking in the same space for years without once considering that surfaces could be wiped down. Clara found grease baked onto the stove, mouse droppings in the corners, and something growing in a pot that she immediately threw outside. She heated water, found rags that were mostly intact, and started scrubbing. 2 hours later, she'd made a visible dent in the grime, and her back was screaming in protest. She was leaning over the stove when the door opened and Samuel stepped inside. "Ma'am? Sorry to interrupt. Just wanted to see if you needed anything from the root cellar." Clara straightened, pushing hair out of her face with the back of her hand. "What's in the root cellar?" "Potatoes, mostly. Some carrots. Wade's not much for preserving food, so we mostly live on whatever doesn't rot first." "That explains the pot outside." Samuel's mouth twitched. "Yes, ma'am. That pot's been a problem for a while." Clara wiped her hands on her apron, or what used to be a curtain before she'd repurposed it. "Samuel, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why does Wade live like this? The house, the food, the complete absence of organization? It's like he's just surviving day to day without planning for anything." Samuel was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "Mr. Bennett's had a hard few years, lost his father 5 winters back. Then his brother left for California. Ranch has been in trouble ever since, between the cattle thieves and the harsh weather and trying to keep this place running with just me and Pete. Well, there hasn't been much time for keeping house." "His father died? And his mother before that?" "Wade's been alone a long time, ma'am. I think he stopped seeing the point of making things nice when there was no one to make them nice for." Clara looked around the kitchen she'd been scrubbing. Suddenly, it seemed less like neglect and more like exhaustion. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. Samuel nodded. "For what it's worth, ma'am, I'm glad you stayed. This place needs someone who cares about more than just keeping the cattle alive." He left, and Clara went back to scrubbing, but her mind was elsewhere. She'd been so focused on her own problems, her scandal, her fear, her complete lack of options, that she hadn't stopped to consider what Wade Bennett's life had been like before she arrived. Alone on a failing ranch, watching his family disappear one by one, surviving, like he'd said, but not living. Clara scrubbed harder. She didn't know how to fix Wade Bennett's life, but she could at least make sure he had clean dishes to eat from. That evening, Wade came back to the house, covered in dust and smelling like horse. He stopped in the doorway, staring at the kitchen. Clara had spent the entire day cleaning. The stove gleamed, the dishes were organized, the floor was visible for the first time in what was probably years. She'd even found curtains in a trunk and hung them in the windows. "What did you do?" Wade asked. "I cleaned." Clara was stirring something on the stove, actual stew made from the vegetables Samuel had brought up from the root cellar. "Is that a problem?" "No, Wade removed his hat, still looking around like he didn't recognize his own house. "I didn't expect you to do all this in one day. There's still plenty left to do. The bedroom needs attention, the shelves need repairing, and someone should probably deal with the mice in that shed before they decide to move into the house." Wade almost smiled again. "You planning to take over the whole ranch?" "Just the parts that are falling apart." Clara ladled stew into 2 bowls, which, from what I can tell, is most of it. They ate dinner in a silence that was slightly less awkward than breakfast. Wade didn't compliment the food, but he had 3 bowls of it, which Clara took as approval. Afterward, he disappeared outside to check on something, and Clara started organizing the papers she'd found stacked haphazardly on a shelf. Most of them were bills. Supply orders, records of cattle sales, all of it stuffed together with no system, no dates, nothing to indicate what had been paid and what was still owed. Clara spread everything across the table and started sorting. She was deep into trying to decipher Wade's handwriting when he came back inside. "What are you doing now?" he asked. "Trying to understand your bookkeeping system. Except I don't think you have a bookkeeping system. I think you have a shove everything on a shelf and hope it works out system." Wade crossed his arms. "It's worked fine so far." "Has it?" Clara held up a bill. "Because according to this, you paid the general store twice for the same order of supplies. And this one," she grabbed another paper, "says you sold cattle to a buyer in Helena, but I can't find any record of the payment." Wade frowned. I got paid for those cattle. I'm sure you did. But where's the record? How do you know you got paid the right amount? How do you track what you're owed versus what you owe? I remember. You remember. Clara set down the papers. Mr. Bennett, Wade, you can't run a ranch on memory. You need records. Actual, organized records that you can refer to when someone tries to cheat you. Who's trying to cheat me? I don't know yet. That's my point. Clara pulled the pile of papers toward her. Let me do this. Let me organize your books and figure out where your money is actually going. Because from what I'm seeing here, you're losing more than you realize. Wade studied her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. Show me. They worked until midnight, Clara going through every paper, Wade explaining what he could remember about each transaction. By the end, they'd uncovered at least 3 instances where Wade had been underpaid, 2 where he'd paid for supplies he'd never received, and 1 absolutely brazen case where his ranch hand, not Pete or Samuel, someone who'd left months ago, had been pocketing money from cattle sales. I'll be damned, Wade said, staring at the organized ledger Clara had created. How did you figure all this out? I was a governess. Before that, I kept books for my father's printing business. Numbers make sense to me. They follow rules. Unlike people, she didn't add. Unlike society and reputation and all the other things that had destroyed her life back east. Wade looked at her with something that might have been respect. How much did I lose? Clara calculated quickly. In the last 6 months alone? At least $300. Probably more if I can track down all the records. Wade swore under his breath. I can't afford to lose $300. I know. That's why I'm going to make sure it doesn't happen again. Clara closed the ledger. I'll keep your books from now on. Every transaction recorded, every payment verified. No more trusting people, to be honest, just because it's easier. Wade was quiet. Then he said, Why? Why what? Why are you doing all this? The cleaning, the books, all of it. You could have just existed here, done the minimum. Instead, you're taking apart my entire life. Clara met his eyes, because existing isn't enough. You said yesterday that survival is all that matters out here. Well, I'm trying to survive. And the only way I know how to do that is to be useful, to prove that I'm worth keeping around. She looked away. Back east, being useful wasn't enough. Maybe here it will be. Wade didn't say anything for a moment. Then he stood, pushed his chair back, and headed for the door. Wade, Clara called after him. He turned back. Thank you, she said, for marrying me, for giving me a chance. I know you didn't have to. Wade's expression was unreadable. You gave yourself the chance by getting on that train. All I did was not send you back. He put his hat on. Get some rest. Tomorrow we've got more work to do. He left, and Clara sat alone at the table surrounded by papers that finally made sense. For the first time since Philadelphia, she felt like she might actually survive this. The next 2 weeks fell into a pattern. Wade worked the ranch with Pete and Samuel. Clara worked the house, the books, and gradually the garden plot behind the kitchen that had been completely overtaken by weeds. She woke before dawn, went to bed after dark, and fell asleep too exhausted to dream. The town of Dry Creek continued to whisper. Clara heard it every time they went for supplies, the conversations that stopped when she walked past, the looks from the women outside the general store, the way people made sure she knew they were talking about her, even if they didn't say it directly. Margaret Sutton, the boarding house owner, seemed to be the ringleader. She had opinions about everything, and she shared them loudly. Clara was too thin, too pale, too educated for ranch life, too scandalous, too damaged. Clara ignored it all. She'd survived worse in Philadelphia, but Wade noticed. One afternoon, they were loading supplies into the wagon when Clara heard Margaret Sutton's voice from inside the store. I'm just saying, that girl is going to break. Mark my words, she's too soft for this life. Give it another month and she'll be crying at the station again, begging for a ticket east. Wade's jaw tightened. Clara grabbed his arm before he could move. Don't, she said quietly. It's not worth it. She's talking about you like you're not even a person. She talked about me like that in Philadelphia too. At least here I have work to do. I don't need her approval. Clara tightened her grip on his arm. Please, just let it go. Wade looked like he wanted to argue. Instead, he finished loading the wagon in silence, helped Clara up, and drove them home without saying a word. But that evening, after dinner, he said, "You're tougher than you look." Clara glanced up from the ledger she was updating. "Is that a compliment?" "It's an observation." "Well, thank you, I think." Wade leaned back in his chair. "You proved Margaret Sutton wrong. Most women would have broken down after hearing that." "I did break down," Clara said. "At the train station, remember? I just don't plan to make a habit of it." "Still, you handled it better than I expected." Clara set down her pen. "Wade, I spent 3 months in Philadelphia being called every terrible name you can imagine. People I'd known for years crossed the street to avoid me. Former friends wouldn't acknowledge me in public. Children threw stones at me. So no, Margaret Sutton saying I'm too soft doesn't exactly shake my foundation." Wade's expression darkened. "People threw stones at you?" "Twice, small ones. I'm fine." "That's not fine, that's—" He stopped, took a breath. "Did anyone stop them?" "No, because their parents were the ones who said it was acceptable." Clara returned to the ledger. "That's how it works back east, Wade. When someone powerful decides you're worthless, everyone else falls in line. At least here, people are honest about not liking me. They don't pretend to be my friend first." Wade didn't respond. But later, when Clara went outside to get water from the pump, she found him sitting on the porch steps, staring out at the darkening prairie. She almost went back inside. Instead, she sat down beside him. They sat in silence for a while. Then Wade said, "I'm not good at this." "At what?" "Talking, being, I don't know, whatever husbands are supposed to be." Clara almost laughed. "I'm not exactly an expert on being a wife. We're both figuring this out. Still, you deserve better than—" He gestured vaguely at the house, the ranch, himself. "All this?" "Maybe, but this is what I have, so I'm making it work." Clara pulled her shawl tighter against the evening chill. "Besides, you're not as bad as you think you are. I threatened Tommy Briggs in the middle of town." "Tommy Briggs is an idiot who was spreading lies. Someone needed to make him stop." Wade turned to look at her. In the fading light, his face was half in shadow. "You really believe that?" "I really believe that if you're going to survive out here, you need someone watching your back. That's what you told me, right? Survival is all that matters?" "Yeah, I said that. So that's what we're doing. Watching each other's backs, making sure we both survive." Clara stood up. "Now come inside. I made bread, and if we don't eat it before Pete and Samuel smell it, there won't be any left." Wade followed her inside, and for the first time since they'd married, the silence between them felt less like awkwardness and more like understanding. They were both broken people trying to build something whole. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't perfect. But it might be enough. The trouble started 3 weeks after the wedding. Clara noticed it first because she was the one managing the books. Supplies that should have arrived weren't showing up. Cattle counts were off. Small things. Easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. But Clara was always paying attention. "We're short 6 head," she told Wade one evening. "According to Samuel's count from last week, we should have 83 cattle in the north pasture. This week's count shows 77. Wade frowned. "Could be wolves." "Could be, or could be thieves." "Out here, wolves and thieves are basically the same thing." Wade pushed back from the table. "I'll ride out tomorrow and check the fences." He found 2 sections cut clean through. "Deliberate," Samuel confirmed when Wade brought him to see the damage. "Someone came through here with wire cutters. This wasn't wolves." "Who would steal cattle this close to the ranch house?" Pete asked. "That's bold even for rustlers." Wade's expression was grim. Someone who thinks they can get away with it. That night, Wade and Samuel took turns keeping watch. Nothing happened. But 3 days later, they were short another 4 head. This time, Wade was furious. "I'm riding into Dry Creek," he announced at breakfast. "I'm talking to Sheriff Dawson." "Dawson's useless," Pete said around a mouthful of eggs. "Everyone knows he doesn't do anything unless Silas Crow tells him to." Clara's head came up. "Who's Silas Crow?" The 3 men exchanged glances. "Cattle baron," Wade said finally. "Owns most of the land between here and Helena. Controls the water rights, the trade routes, most of the smaller ranchers. If you want to do business in this territory, you go through Crow." "And if you don't go through Crow?" Clara asked. "Then you have problems." Wade stood up. "I'm still talking to Dawson. Maybe he'll actually do his job for once. He rode into town and came back angrier than when he'd left. Dawson said there's nothing he can do without proof, Wade told Clara. Said cattle wander off all the time. Suggested I should keep a better eye on my herd. That's ridiculous. We have proof. The cut fences, the missing cattle. Dawson doesn't care about proof. He cares about staying on Crow's good side. Wade paced the kitchen. And right now, I'd bet money Crow's the one behind this. Why would a cattle baron bother with a small ranch like ours? Wade stopped pacing. Because 6 months ago, Crow offered to buy Black Ridge. Said it was perfectly positioned near the water source he needs for his herds. I told him no. Said this ranch has been in my family for 2 generations, and I'm not selling. Clara felt her stomach drop. What did he say? He smiled. Said I'd change my mind eventually, that people usually do when things get difficult. Wade's hands curled into fists. I think he's making things difficult. Over the next month, things got worse. More cattle disappeared. A supply wagon heading to Black Ridge from Dry Creek broke an axle on a road that had been perfectly fine the day before. Someone had scattered caltrops across the path. The well pump broke, and when Wade took it apart, he found sand deliberately packed into the mechanism. Small attacks. Nothing big enough to destroy the ranch outright, but enough to make survival difficult. Clara started keeping a record of every incident, dates, times, exactly what happened. Wade thought she was being paranoid. It's not paranoia if someone really is out to get you, Clara said, adding another entry to her log. Fair point. Then Pete got jumped in town. He came back bloody, one eye swollen shut, 3 ribs cracked. He'd been at the saloon, which Wade had told him not to go to, when 2 men he'd never seen before started a fight. They'd beaten him badly enough that the bartender had to drag him into the back room until he could stand on his own. Did they say anything? Wade demanded. Pete spat blood into a bucket. Yeah, they said Black Ridge is on borrowed time. Said I should find work somewhere else before the whole place goes under. Did they mention Crow? Didn't have to. Everyone in that saloon knew who sent them. Wade sent Pete to rest and called a meeting with Samuel. Clara listened from the kitchen doorway. We can't fight Silas Crow, Samuel said. He's got money, men, connections. We're 3 ranch hands and a rancher barely keeping his head above water. So what do you suggest? We just roll over and let him steal my land? I'm suggesting we be smart about this. Crow's trying to force your hand. Don't give him the satisfaction of reacting the way he wants. And what does he want? He wants you to start a fight you can't win. He wants you to do something stupid so he can claim self-defense when he takes everything you have. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, So we do nothing? We wait, we watch, and we make sure every single attack is documented. Samuel glanced toward the kitchen where Clara was standing. Your wife's already doing that. Let her keep doing it. Eventually, Crow will make a mistake big enough that even Sheriff Dawson can't ignore it. It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it was the smart one. Wade hated it. Clara could see it in the way he paced the house at night, in the way his jaw stayed tight during meals, in the way he checked and rechecked the fences like he could somehow prevent the next attack through sheer force of will. Clara kept documenting, and she started thinking. In Philadelphia, she'd learned that powerful men like Gerald Whitfield didn't respond to confrontation. They responded to exposure, to having their carefully constructed reputations threatened. Maybe Silas Crow was the same way. One evening, while Wade was out checking on the livestock, Clara rode the wagon into Dry Creek alone. It was risky. Wade had told her not to go to town without him. Too many people still whispered, still judged, still waited for her to prove she was as weak as they thought. But Clara needed information, and she wasn't going to get it sitting at the ranch. She tied up the wagon outside the general store and went inside. The owner, a balding man named Henry Tucker, looked up in surprise. Mrs. Bennett, didn't expect to see you today. I need to ask you something, Mr. Tucker, and I need you to be honest with me. Tucker glanced toward the door, nervous. I'm not sure what you mean. Silas Crow. How much of this town does he actually control? Tucker's face went pale. Mrs. Bennett, I really don't think... I'm not trying to start trouble. I'm trying to understand what my husband is up against. Clara leaned on the counter. Please. If Crow is as powerful as everyone says, then I need to know exactly how much power he has. Tucker was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. He owns the land the general store sits on, the saloon, the boarding house, half the residential lots. If you live in Dry Creek, you're probably paying rent to Silas Crow, whether you know it or not. And the sheriff? Crow's cousin. Got the job because of family connections, stays in it because he does what Crow tells him to do. Clara's mind was working fast. What about the train station? Who owns that? Railroad company. Why? Just curious. Clara straightened. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. You've been very helpful. She left before he could ask questions. Back at the ranch, Clara spread out a map of the territory on the kitchen table. She marked every property Crow owned, every business he controlled, every connection he had. By midnight, she had a web of influence that stretched across the entire region. It was intimidating, but it was also enlightening, because Clara noticed something interesting. Every piece of property Crow owned was positioned along water sources or trade routes. He'd built his empire by controlling access to water, to markets, to the railroad, and Black Ridge Ranch sat right in the middle of a crucial water route. Wade found her still working when he came in for breakfast the next morning. Have you slept? He asked. Not yet. Clara pointed to the map. Look at this. Crow doesn't just want your ranch because it's nice land, he needs it. Without Black Ridge, his northern herds have to travel an extra 15 miles to reach water. That's the difference between profit and loss on a cattle drive. Wade studied the map. So he's not trying to destroy me out of spite. No. He's trying to destroy you because your ranch is the one piece of his territory he doesn't control. And as long as you own it, you have leverage. Leverage for what? Clara looked up at him. I don't know yet, but there has to be a way to use this. Some way to make Crow back off without giving up your land. Wade sat down across from her. You're not planning something stupid, are you? That depends on your definition of stupid. Clara. Wade, we can't just wait for Crow to bleed us dry. Samuel's right that we shouldn't start a fight, but maybe we can change the terms of the fight we're already in. How? Clara traced the route from Black Ridge to Dry Creek on the map. I don't know yet, but I'm going to figure it out. Wade looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, You know, when you first arrived, I thought you'd be helpless out here. City woman with no frontier experience. I figured I'd have to teach you everything. And now? Now I'm starting to think I should be taking lessons from you. Clara smiled despite her exhaustion. Well, that's progress. It would be another week before Clara figured out her plan. Another week of stolen cattle and sabotaged equipment and the slow grinding pressure of Silas Crow trying to break them. But when the idea finally came to her, it was so obvious she couldn't believe she'd missed it. The train station. Crow controlled the town. He controlled the land. He controlled the water. But he didn't control the railroad. And Clara was about to make that matter. The train station in Dry Creek was a square building with peeling paint and windows that rattled when the wind blew. Clara had passed it a dozen times without paying much attention. Now she stood outside it at 7 in the morning, watching the station master unlock the door, and saw something everyone else had missed. The station wasn't just a building, it was a gateway. Everything that came into Dry Creek, supplies, mail, people, information, came through this station first. And everything that left went through here too, including shipping records. Clara waited until the station master had settled in with his coffee before she knocked on the office door. Mrs. Bennett. He looked surprised, but not unfriendly. His name was Arthur Webb, and he'd been polite to her the few times they'd spoken. What can I do for you? Mr. Webb, I have a strange question. Do you keep records of all the freight that comes through the station? Of course. Railroad requires it. Every shipment logged, every destination recorded. He gestured to a row of ledgers on the shelf behind his desk. Why do you ask? I'm trying to track some supply orders for the ranch. My husband's bookkeeping is... Clara smiled apologetically. Well, let's say it needs improvement. I thought if I could cross-reference his records with yours, I might figure out where things went wrong. It wasn't entirely a lie. Wade's bookkeeping really was terrible. But that wasn't why Clara was here. Webb hesitated. I'm not sure I should let you look at other people's shipping records. I'm only interested in records related to Black Ridge Ranch, just our own shipments. Well, I suppose that's reasonable. Webb pulled down a ledger from 6 months ago and handed it to her. You can look through this one, but I've got work to do, so you'll have to manage on your own. Thank you, Mr. Webb. I really appreciate this. Clara took the ledger to a small table in the corner and started reading. She wasn't looking for Black Ridge's records. She was looking for patterns. For 3 hours, she went through entries. Shipments of cattle from various ranches to markets in Helena. Supplies coming in from the east. Mail deliveries, passenger arrivals. Everything documented in Webb's careful handwriting. And slowly, a picture began to form. Silas Crow's name appeared everywhere. Cattle shipments, supply orders, even personal packages. But what caught Clara's attention was the timing. In the past year, at least 6 small ranchers had sold their land to Crow, and in every single case, those sales had been preceded by a sudden increase in lost or delayed shipments. Ranch A would order winter supplies. The shipment would be delayed by 2 weeks. Their cattle would starve. Within a month, they'd sell to Crow. Ranch B would send cattle to market. The shipment would be accidentally rerouted. By the time the cattle reached their destination, half would be dead from dehydration. Ranch B would sell to Crow within 6 weeks. Ranch C ordered medicine for sick livestock. The medicine never arrived. The livestock died. Ranch C sold to Crow. Every time the pattern was the same. And every time the railroad blamed it on paperwork errors or scheduling conflicts or simple bad luck. But it wasn't bad luck. It was deliberate. Claire's hands were shaking as she copied down dates and details into her own notebook. This was what she'd been looking for. Not just evidence that Crow was attacking Black Ridge, but proof that he'd been destroying small ranchers for years using the railroad as his weapon. "Find what you needed?" Webb asked when Clara finally stood up. "Yes. Thank you." Clara closed the ledger carefully. "Mr. Webb, do you ever notice patterns in shipping problems, like certain ranches having more issues than others?" Webb's expression shifted, became guarded. "Sometimes things go wrong. It's a complicated system." "Of course. I just wondered if you'd noticed anything unusual." "Mrs. Bennett." Webb lowered his voice. "I don't know what you're looking for, but I'd be careful if I were you. Some questions are safer left unasked." Clara met his eyes. "What if the questions need to be asked? What if people are being hurt because no one's willing to speak up?" Webb looked away. "I've got a family to feed, a job to keep. Whatever you think you found in those ledgers, it's not worth losing everything over. Even if it's the truth? Especially if it's the truth." Webb opened the office door, a clear dismissal. "I hope you found what you needed for your husband's bookkeeping." Clara left, but she'd gotten what she came for. Back at Black Ridge, Wade was in the barn with Samuel when Clara burst through the door. "I need to show you something," she said, slightly out of breath from riding back at a near gallop. Wade looked up from the harness he was repairing. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine, but I found something about Crow." She spread her notebook across a workbench and explained everything: the shipping records, the pattern of delays and lost shipments, the ranches that had been forced to sell. Wade's expression grew darker with every word. "How many ranches?" he asked when she finished. "At least 6 in the past year, probably more if I went back further." Clara pointed to her notes. "Wade, this isn't just about Black Ridge. Crow's been systematically destroying anyone who won't sell to him, and he's using the railroad to do it. The railroad wouldn't cooperate with something like that. They'd lose business." "Would they? Think about it. Crow's one of their biggest customers. He ships thousands of head of cattle every year. If he threatened to take his business elsewhere, the railroad would do almost anything to keep him happy." Samuel had been listening quietly. Now he said, "She's right. Railroad companies don't care about small ranchers. We're nothing compared to someone like Crow." Wade stared at the notes. "Even if this is all true, what can we do about it? Crow owns the sheriff. He owns half the town. Who's going to believe us?" "I don't know yet," Claire admitted, "but at least now we know what we're fighting. It's not just random attacks. It's a system, and systems have weaknesses." Wade looked at her with something that might have been admiration or might have been concern. "You're talking about taking on Silas Crow directly. That's not a fight we can win. Maybe not alone." Clara tapped her notebook. "But what if we weren't alone? What if all these other ranchers knew what Crow did to them? What if they banded together?" "They won't. They already lost their land. Why would they risk what little they have left?" "Because people don't like being cheated. And because right now every rancher in this territory thinks they're the only one having problems. If they knew it was part of a pattern, if they knew they weren't alone, that changes things." Samuel shook his head. It's too dangerous. Crow finds out you're talking to other ranchers, organizing some kind of resistance. He'll come down on you twice as hard. He's already coming down on us, Clara said. What else can he do? Wade and Samuel exchanged a look. A lot, Wade said quietly. He can do a lot worse than stealing cattle and breaking equipment. But Clara could see the wheels turning in Wade's mind. He was considering it, actually considering the possibility that they could fight back. Let me think about this, Wade said finally. Don't do anything yet. Don't talk to anyone. Don't mention this to anyone in town. Just let me think. Clara agreed, though she could already feel the urgency building. Every day they waited was another day Crow had to tighten his grip. That night Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in Wade's bed, which still felt strange to call hers, and listened to the sounds of the ranch. Horses shifting in the barn, wind rattling the shutters, Wade pacing in the main room. Around midnight, she got up and went to the door. Wade was sitting at the table, her notebook open in front of him. He looked up when she appeared. Sorry, did I wake you? No. Clara sat down across from him. Can't sleep either? Been thinking about your plan. The one where we convince other ranchers to stand up to Crow. And? Wade closed the notebook. It's crazy. Probably won't work. Could get us all killed. But I can't think of anything better. He leaned back in his chair. You really think people will listen to you? I think people will listen to evidence, to facts, to proof that what happened to them wasn't their fault. Clara pulled the notebook toward her. The rancher who lost his cattle to bad shipments, that was James Patterson, right? He lives just outside Dry Creek now, works at the lumber mill. Yeah, lost everything about 8 months ago. What if we talked to him, showed him these records, asked if he remembered anything suspicious about his shipments? He'll either think we're crazy or he'll be too scared to help. Maybe. But what if he's not? What if he's been waiting for someone to notice? Clara met Wade's eyes. Wade, we have to try. Because the alternative is losing Black Ridge the same way Patterson lost his ranch. Slowly, painfully, while everyone watches and does nothing. Wade was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Tomorrow. We'll go talk to Patterson tomorrow. But if he tells us to leave, we leave. No pushing. Understood? Understood. They went to bed, and this time Clara did sleep. Not peacefully, but she slept. James Patterson lived in a small house on the edge of Dry Creek with his wife and 2 children. When Wade knocked on the door the next afternoon, Patterson opened it with a shotgun in his hands. Bennett. Patterson didn't lower the gun. What do you want? Just to talk, that's all. I don't have anything to say to you. Clara stepped forward. Mr. Patterson, my name is Clara Bennett. I'm Wade's wife. I've been looking at shipping records from the train station, and I found something I think you should see. Patterson's eyes narrowed. Shipping records? Why would I care about shipping records? Because they might explain what happened to your ranch. That got his attention. Patterson lowered the shotgun slightly. What are you talking about? Mom. Can we come inside? Clara asked. I promise this won't take long. Patterson hesitated, then stepped back. 5 minutes. That's all you get. Inside, the house was cramped and sparse. Patterson's wife watched from the kitchen with worried eyes while their children peeked from behind her skirts. Clara spread her notebook on the table and showed Patterson the records. You sent cattle to Helena last spring, she said, but according to the train station logs, your shipment was rerouted to Butte. By the time it reached the right destination, half your cattle were dead. Patterson's face went pale. How did you know that? Because it's all here. Dates, times, the original route, and the changed route. And look at this. Clara pointed to another entry. The change was authorized by someone at the railroad. But there's a note here in the margin. It says Pier SC request. SC, Wade said. Silas Crow. Patterson stared at the notebook like it might bite him. You're saying Crow deliberately sabotaged my shipment? I'm saying the evidence suggests it. And you're not the only one. Clara showed him the other examples. 6 ranchers in the past year, all had shipping problems, all lost their ranches, all sold to Crow. Patterson sank into a chair. His wife came to stand beside him, one hand on his shoulder. I knew something was wrong, Patterson said quietly. The railroad blamed it on a clerical error. Said someone had written the wrong destination, but I'd checked those forms 3 times. I know I filled them outright. Of course you did, Clara said. Because it wasn't your mistake. It was deliberate sabotage. But why? Patterson's wife spoke for the first time. Why would Mr. Crow do something so cruel? James worked himself half to death on that ranch. Because Crow wants to control all the land in this territory, Wade said, and he doesn't care who he destroys to get it. Patterson looked up at Wade. So what do we do about it? Go to the sheriff? He's Crow's cousin. Go to the railroad? They're in Crow's pocket. There's no one to complain to. That's why we need to make enough noise that people outside this territory start paying attention, Clara said. Federal authorities, newspaper reporters, railroad inspectors, someone who doesn't answer to Silas Crow. You're talking about starting a war. I'm talking about exposing the truth. Patterson shook his head. I can't. I'm sorry, Mrs. Bennett. I really am. But I've got a family to think about. I've already lost one ranch. I can't risk losing anything else. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to tell him that staying silent meant Crow would keep destroying people. But she'd promised Wade they wouldn't push. I understand, she said quietly. Thank you for listening. They left Patterson's house in silence. Wade drove the wagon back toward the ranch without speaking. Finally, Clara said, That went badly. Expected it to. Wade kept his eyes on the road. Patterson's scared. Can't blame him. So what now? We try again. Talk to the other ranchers. Hope one of them is angry enough to help. They tried 3 more ranchers over the next week. The reactions were all variations of the same theme: shock, anger, fear, but no one would help. Everyone had too much to lose. Clara was beginning to lose hope when Wade came back from checking the north pasture with news that made everything worse. Someone poisoned this water source, he said, his voice tight with fury. Dumped something in the creek. Lost 12 cattle before I figured it out. Clara felt sick. 12? Could have been worse if I hadn't found it when I did. Wade paced the kitchen. That's it. I'm done playing defense. I'm riding to Crow's ranch and we're settling this. Wade, no. He poisoned my water, Clara. Killed my cattle. At what point do we stop pretending there's a peaceful solution to this? When you ride to Crow's ranch and confront him, what exactly do you think will happen? He'll admit everything? Apologize? Stop attacking us? Maybe if I make it clear I'm not backing down. You'll get yourself killed. Clara grabbed his arm. Wade, please, think about this. Crow wants you to react violently. That gives him an excuse to come after you legally. Self-defense, protection of property, whatever lie he needs to tell. So I'm supposed to just sit here while he destroys everything I've worked for? No, you're supposed to be smarter than he is. Clara took a breath, steadying herself. I have another idea. It's risky, but it might work. Wade looked at her warily. What kind of idea? The old schoolhouse, the one by the train station, is it still standing? What does that have to do with anything? Just answer the question. Is it still standing? Yeah, it's been abandoned for years, but the structure's sound. Why? Clara sat down at the table and started writing. Because I'm going to open a school. Wade stared at her. You're going to what? Open a school for the children in Dry Creek and the surrounding ranches. Free classes, reading, writing, arithmetic, everything they need. Clara, have you lost your mind? We're in the middle of a war with Silas Crow and you want to become a school teacher? Not just a school teacher. Clara looked up at him. A presence. A person the community can't ignore. Right now, half this town thinks I'm weak, that I'm going to break and run back east any day now. But if I open a school, if I give their children an education they can't get anywhere else, they'll have to pay attention to me. So what? So they pay attention. How does that help us fight Crow? Because right now everyone's isolated. Every rancher thinks they're alone. But if I'm teaching their children, I'm in their homes. I'm hearing their stories. I'm building connections. Clara tapped her pen on the paper. And when the time comes to stand up to Crow, those connections matter. People protect things they're invested in. Wade ran a hand through his hair. This is crazy. I know. Crow's not going to like it. I'm counting on that. If this goes wrong, we're no worse off than we already are. Clara stood up. Wade, we can't beat Crow with violence. He's got more men, more money, more power, but we can beat him with community, with people who decide they're tired of being afraid. Wade looked at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, sharp and disbelieving. You really think you can pull this off? Win over a town that spent the last 2 months whispering about you? I survived Philadelphia society. I think I can handle Dry Creek, Montana. Wade shook his head, but he was almost smiling. All right, let's say I agree to this insane plan. What do you need from me? Help me clean out the schoolhouse, spread the word that I'm offering free classes, and don't kill Silas Crow before I get a chance to destroy him properly. No promises on that last one. Wade. Fine, I'll try not to kill Silas Crow, but if he poisons another water source, all bets are off. The abandoned schoolhouse was in worse shape than Clara had hoped, but better than she'd feared. The roof leaked in 2 places. The floor was covered in dust and debris. Several of the windows were cracked, but the desks were still there, and the chalkboard was intact. Clara spent 3 days cleaning. Wade helped when he could, though he still thought the whole thing was a waste of time. Pete and Samuel were more openly skeptical. You really think people are going to send their kids to be taught by the crying bride from the train station? Pete asked, while helping Clara haul out broken furniture. Her name is Clara, Wade said sharply. And yeah, I think they will. Because she's offering something no one else in this town is offering. What? A chance to be associated with the woman everyone's gossiping about? A chance for their children to learn from someone who actually knows how to teach. Wade dropped a broken chair onto the growing pile outside. Now either help or get out of the way. Pete helped. By the end of the week, the schoolhouse looked almost respectable. Clara had scrubbed every surface, repaired what she could, and arranged the desks in neat rows. She'd made a sign for the door, free school, all children welcome, classes begin Monday. She posted it on Saturday morning. By Saturday afternoon, the gossip was everywhere. Margaret Sutton predictably had opinions. That woman has no business teaching anyone's children. She's barely respectable herself. And free classes? What's she trying to prove? But other voices were less certain. Clara heard them while shopping for supplies at the general store, careful to look like she wasn't listening. My oldest could use better reading skills, one woman said. And it's not like we can afford to send her east for school. But what if the Bennett woman fills their heads with nonsense, another replied. What nonsense? Teaching them to read and write? How's that nonsense? Monday morning came. Clara arrived at the schoolhouse at 7, her stomach twisted with nerves. She'd set up the classroom as best she could, written a simple lesson plan for the first day, prepared herself for the possibility that no one would come. By 8 o'clock, she had 2 students. By 8:30, she had 7. By 9 o'clock, when she officially started class, she had 12 children ranging from age 6 to 14, all sitting nervously at desks while their parents watched from the doorway. Clara took a deep breath and began. Good morning. My name is Mrs. Bennett, and I'm going to be your teacher. I know some of you might have heard stories about me. Some of those stories are probably true. Some probably aren't. But here's what matters. In this classroom, we're going to learn, we're going to work hard, and we're going to treat each other with respect. Does everyone understand? 12 heads nodded. Good. Let's begin. She started with reading, simple passages that would help her assess each child's level. Some could barely sound out words. Others read fluently, but had clearly never been taught proper grammar. All of them were eager to learn. By the end of the first day, Clara was exhausted, but she was also exhilarated. When the parents came to collect their children, several of them lingered. One woman, the one who'd been uncertain at the general store, approached Clara hesitantly. Mrs. Bennett, I just wanted to say, my daughter hasn't stopped talking about class all afternoon. She said you made reading fun. I'm glad, Clara said. She's a bright girl. She'll do well. Thank you for doing this, the woman trailed off. Anyway, thank you. It was a small thing, but it was a start. Word spread quickly. By the second week, Clara had 18 students. By the third, she had 23. Parents who'd been skeptical started showing up to see what the fuss was about. They saw their children learning, saw Clara treating every student with patience and respect, saw that maybe, just maybe, the crying bride from the train station was more than the gossip suggested. And slowly, people started talking to her. At first, it was just pleasantries. Good morning, Mrs. Bennett. Thank you for teaching my son. Weather's turning cold, isn't it? But gradually, The conversations deepened. Parents would linger after class. They'd mention casually that supplies were getting more expensive, that shipments were being delayed, that running a ranch was getting harder every year. Clara listened, and she remembered. One afternoon, a rancher named Thomas Whitfield stopped by the schoolhouse. His daughter was one of Clara's best students, a quiet 12-year-old who devoured every book Clara could find for her. "Mrs. Bennett, could I speak with you?" Thomas asked after the other parents had left. "Of course." They sat on the schoolhouse steps while Thomas's daughter played nearby. Thomas was silent for a moment, choosing his words carefully. "My daughter told me you used to live in Philadelphia," he said, finally. "That's right. Must have been hard coming all the way out here, leaving everything behind." Clara glanced at him. "It was necessary." "Yeah, I know something about that." Thomas watched his daughter. "I lost my ranch 3 years ago. Cattle shipment got rerouted. By the time I got them back, half were dead. Couldn't recover from the loss. Had to sell." Clara's attention sharpened. "You sold to Silas Crow?" Thomas nodded. "Didn't have much choice. He offered the only price I could get. It was half what the land was worth, but I had debts. Needed to pay them before the bank took everything." "Did you ever think the shipment being rerouted wasn't an accident?" Thomas looked at her sharply. "What makes you say that?" "Because it's happened to other people, multiple times, always followed by them having to sell to Crow." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I thought about it. But what could I do? Who would I tell? The sheriff? The railroad? What if there were enough people? What if everyone who'd been cheated by Crow stood together?" "Mrs. Bennett, people have families, jobs. They can't risk making Crow angry. They're already at risk. Crow's going to keep doing this until someone stops him." Clara turned to face Thomas. "I'm not asking you to do anything dangerous. I'm just asking you to think about it. And maybe, if the time comes, to be willing to tell the truth about what happened to you." Thomas stood up, calling to his daughter. Before he left, he said quietly, "You're a brave woman, Mrs. Bennett, or a foolish one. I'm not sure which." "Maybe both," Clara said. Thomas almost smiled. "Yeah, maybe both." That night, Clara told Wade about the conversation. "Thomas Whitfield's thinking about it," she said. "He's not ready to help yet, but he's thinking. That's progress." Wade looked up from the fence post he was repairing. "How many others?" "3 that I know of. Parents whose ranches were destroyed by Crow's tactics. They're all scared, but they're also angry. If we can channel that anger, we might have something." Wade set down his tools. "But Clara, you need to be careful. Crow's going to notice what you're doing. The school, the conversations with parents, all of it. He's not stupid." "I know. And when he notices, he's going to try to stop you. Let him try." Wade crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and took her shoulders. "I'm serious. This isn't a game. Crow's already shown he's willing to poison livestock and beat up ranch hands. What do you think he'll do to you?" Clara met his eyes. "The same thing Gerald Whitfield did. Try to destroy my reputation. Make people believe I'm dangerous or crazy or whatever story keeps them from listening to me. The difference is, this time I'm not alone. This time I have you." Wade's grip softened. "You do. But that doesn't make you invincible." "I know, but it makes me stubborn." Clara smiled slightly. "Besides, someone has to be the brave one. You're too busy being practical. Somebody has to be practical. Otherwise, we'd both be charging at Crow with our hair on fire. Give me time. I might still do that." Wade pulled her into a quick embrace. It was the first time he'd done anything like that since they'd married. Clara froze for a moment, then relaxed into it. "Be careful," Wade said against her hair. "Please." "I will." It was a lie. They both knew it. But sometimes lies were necessary. The first real threat came 2 weeks later. Clara was at the schoolhouse, finishing up an afternoon lesson, when Sheriff Dawson walked in. He didn't knock, just pushed open the door and stood there with his hand resting on his gun belt. "Mrs. Bennett, need to have a word." Clara's students went silent, staring at the sheriff with wide eyes. "Children, you're dismissed for today," Clara said calmly. "We'll continue tomorrow." The students gathered their things and filed out quickly, shooting nervous glances at the sheriff. When they were gone, Clara turned to Dawson. What can I do for you, Sheriff? Got a complaint. Someone says you've been spreading lies about upstanding citizens of this community. I haven't spread any lies. Silas Crow says different. Says you've been telling people he's been sabotaging ranches, causing shipping problems, running people out of business. Dawson stepped closer. Now, Mrs. Bennett, I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt. You're new here. You don't understand how things work. So I'm going to explain it to you real simple. He was trying to intimidate her. Clara could see it in his posture, hear it in his voice. She'd seen the same tactics used in Philadelphia. They'd worked then because she'd been alone and powerless. She wasn't alone anymore. I understand perfectly well how things work, Sheriff, Clara said evenly. Mr. Crow controls most of this territory through a combination of legitimate business and deliberate sabotage. He uses his influence with the railroad to destroy ranchers who won't sell to him. Then he buys their land for a fraction of its value. And you know all of this because you're his cousin, and you help him cover it up. Dawson's face went red. You better watch your mouth, Or what? You'll arrest me? On what charge? Telling the truth? Clara didn't back down. I have documentation, Sheriff. Train station records, dates and details of every suspicious shipping problem over the past 2 years. All of them connected to Silas Crow. All of them followed by land sales. Those records don't prove anything. They prove enough. And if federal authorities ever get interested in why so many ranches in this territory have been failing, those records will raise some very uncomfortable questions. Dawson leaned in close. Listen to me very carefully, Mrs. Bennett. You're playing a dangerous game. Silas Crow is not a man you want as an enemy. He made himself my enemy when he started attacking my husband's ranch. Clara held her ground. I'm just returning the favor. Your husband's going to get hurt because of you, maybe worse than hurt. Is that what you want? What I want is for Crow to stop destroying innocent people. If he does that, we have no quarrel. Dawson straightened. You've been warned. What happens next is on you. He left. Clara stood alone in the empty schoolhouse, her hands shaking with adrenaline. She'd just made an enemy of the sheriff, openly threatened Silas Crow, declared war. There was no going back now. When she got home that evening, Wade took one look at her face and said, "What happened?" She told him everything. Wade's expression grew darker with every word. Dawson threatened you, in your own schoolhouse. He tried to scare me. It didn't work. Clara, Wade, I'm fine. And more importantly, now Crow knows we're not backing down. He knows we have evidence. He knows we're willing to fight. Which means he's going to come at us harder. Wade paced the kitchen. We need to move, now. Whatever plan you're building, we need to execute it before Crow decides to get rid of the problem permanently. I'm working on it, but I need more time, more people willing to stand with us. We might not have more time. He was right. Clara knew he was right, but she also knew they couldn't move too soon. They needed overwhelming evidence, undeniable proof, enough people willing to speak up that Crow couldn't silence them all. The solution came from an unexpected source. Arthur Webb, the station master, showed up at Black Ridge Ranch 3 days after Dawson's visit. He looked nervous, kept glancing over his shoulder like he expected someone to follow him. "Mr. Webb," Clara answered the door. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you, both of you." Webb looked at Wade. "It's about the shipping records." They brought him inside. Webb sat at the kitchen table, twisting his hat in his hands. "I've been thinking about what you said, about people being hurt because no one's willing to speak up." Webb took a breath. "I can't stay silent anymore. It's been eating at me for months." "What has?" Wade asked. "The shipping manipulation. I've known about it for over a year. Crow has someone at the railroad office in Helena. They change routing orders, delay shipments, lose paperwork, all at Crow's request. And I've been going along with it because I was afraid of losing my job." Clara felt her heartbeat quicken. "You can prove this? I can show you the original orders versus the changed orders. I kept copies, filed away where no one would notice. I told myself I was just being thorough, but really, I think I always knew something was wrong." Webb met Clara's eyes. "Mrs. Bennett, what you're doing, teaching those kids, standing up to Crow, it made me realize I've been a coward, and I don't want to be a coward anymore." Wade leaned forward. "If you testify about what you know, Crow will destroy you. Maybe, but he's already destroying people. Good people who worked hard and lost everything because of his greed. Webb set his hat on the table. At least if I speak up, I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror. Clara wanted to cry. Instead, she reached across the table and squeezed Webb's hand. Thank you. You have no idea what this means. I think I do. Webb pulled out a packet of papers from his coat. Here, these are copies of the worst cases. 3 ranches that lost everything due to deliberate sabotage. If you can get the other victims to testify, if you can build a case that shows a pattern, you might have enough to get federal authorities interested. We'll need more than just shipping records, Wade said. We'll need witnesses, people willing to go on record. I'll go on record, Webb said. It's why I'm here. They talked for another hour, going through Webb's documentation, planning their next steps. When Webb finally left, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. We can do this, she said to Wade. We actually have a chance. Wade was staring at Webb's papers, his expression unreadable. Yeah, we have a chance, which means Crow's going to realize he needs to act fast. So we act faster. Clara, I need you to promise me something. She looked at him. If this goes wrong, if Crow comes after us and it looks like we're going to lose, I need you to get on a train. Go somewhere he can't find you. Start over. Wade, promise me. No. Clara crossed her arms. I'm not running. Not again. I ran from Philadelphia and it was the right thing to do. But this is different. This is our home, our fight, and I'm not abandoning you just because things get dangerous. You could die. So could you. So could Samuel and Pete and everyone else Crow decides is a threat. But we die fighting, or we die slowly while Crow bleeds us dry. I'd rather die fighting. Wade looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her close, kissed the top of her head, and said, You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most stubborn. Definitely the most stubborn. Yeah, I'm figuring that out. They stood there in the kitchen of Black Ridge Ranch holding each other while the Montana wind rattled the windows and the future pressed down on them like a coming storm. Tomorrow they'd start gathering witnesses. Tomorrow they'd begin building the case that would either save them or destroy them completely. But tonight they had this moment. 2 broken people who'd found each other by accident and decided to stand together on purpose. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't romantic. But it was real. And sometimes real was enough. The attack came on a Tuesday night when the temperature had already dropped below freezing and the sky was heavy with the promise of snow. Clara had stayed late at the schoolhouse, grading papers by lamplight. Wade had told her to be home before dark, but she'd lost track of time. She was halfway through correcting a particularly creative essay about horses when she smelled smoke. Not wood smoke from a stove. Something sharper, chemical. Clara dropped the papers and ran to the window. Across the yard, orange flames were licking up the side of the barn at Black Ridge Ranch. Even from a mile away, she could see the glow against the darkening sky. She grabbed her coat and ran. By the time she reached the ranch, the barn was fully engulfed. Wade and Samuel were trying to get the horses out while Pete worked the pump, throwing bucket after useless bucket of water at flames that were already too big to stop. The heat was intense enough that Clara had to shield her face with her arm. Wade! She screamed over the roar of the fire. He turned, his face black with soot. Get back! The roof's going to... The roof collapsed with a sound like thunder. Burning timber crashed down, sending sparks shooting into the night sky. One of the horses still inside screamed, a horrible human sound that cut through everything else. Wade started toward the barn. Samuel grabbed him, held him back. It's gone, boss. You go in there. You're dead. There are still animals. They're already gone. Samuel's voice cracked. Wade, they're gone. Wade stopped fighting. He stood there watching his barn burn, and Clara saw something in his face that terrified her more than the fire. Defeat. Complete and total defeat. She crossed to him, grabbed his hand. He didn't seem to notice. The barn burned for 3 hours. By the time the flames died down enough to get close, there was nothing left but smoking rubble and the bodies of 4 horses that hadn't made it out. The chickens were dead. Most of the equipment was destroyed. Everything Wade had worked to build was reduced to ash and twisted metal. Pete found the evidence just before dawn. Empty kerosene cans hidden in the grass 50 feet from what used to be the barn. Someone had soaked the building deliberately, then set it ablaze. Crow, Wade said. His voice was flat, empty. We don't know that for sure. Samuel said, though he didn't sound convinced. Who else would it be? Wade kicked one of the cans. He warned us, through Dawson, said there'd be consequences. Clara stared at the ruins. She'd pushed this. She'd told Wade they could fight Crow, that they could win. And now 4 horses were dead, and the barn was destroyed, and Wade looked like something essential had broken inside him. I'm sorry, she whispered. Wade turned to look at her. What? This is my fault. I pushed too hard. I threatened Crow through Dawson. I made him think we were a real threat, and now... Her voice broke. Now you've lost everything. Wade's expression shifted. The emptiness was replaced by something fiercer. No. Wade, no. He grabbed her shoulders. This is not your fault. This is Crow showing us exactly who he is. A man who burns down barns and kills animals because someone dared to stand up to him. Wade's grip tightened. And you know what? He just made a mistake. How is this a mistake? Because now I'm angry, and when I'm angry I stop being careful. Wade released her and turned to Samuel and Pete. We're going to town. Right now. We're going to show everyone what Crow did, and then we're going to make him pay for it. Samuel looked uncertain. Boss, maybe we should wait until... Until what? Until he burns down the house too? Until someone gets killed? Wade's voice was hard. No. We move now, before he has time to cover his tracks. They rode into Dry Creek as the sun was coming up, 4 people covered in soot and ash with murder in their eyes. Wade went straight to the sheriff's office and kicked the door open hard enough to crack the frame. Sheriff Dawson looked up from his coffee, startled. Bennett, what the... Someone burned down my barn last night, Wade said. Killed 4 horses, left kerosene cans as evidence. Dawson's face went carefully neutral. That's terrible. You have any idea who might have done it? Silas Crow. That's a serious accusation. It's the truth. Wade slammed the kerosene can down on Dawson's desk. We found these hidden in the grass. Someone soaked the barn, set it on fire, then tried to hide the evidence. That's not vandalism. That's attempted murder. Attempted murder? Nobody died. 4 horses died. And if I'd been in that barn checking on them like I do most nights, I'd be dead too. Wade leaned over the desk. You going to investigate this, or do I need to go over your head? Dawson's jaw tightened. I'll look into it. You do that. And while you're looking into it, you might want to check with your cousin about where he was last night. Silas Crow has no reason to burn down your barn. He has every reason. I'm building a case against him for land fraud and railroad manipulation. He knows it. You know it. And now he's trying to scare me into stopping. That's paranoid. Is it? Clara stepped forward. She hadn't spoken until now, but she was done being silent. Sheriff, in the past 6 weeks, we've had cattle stolen, fences cut, water poisoned, and now our barn burned down. That's not bad luck. That's a pattern. And it matches the pattern of attacks against every other rancher who refused to sell to Silas Crow. Dawson looked at her with something between pity and contempt. Mrs. Bennett, I understand you're upset, but making wild accusations isn't going to... They're not wild accusations. They're documented facts. Clara pulled out the notebook she'd been keeping. Here. Every attack, every suspicious incident, every shipping problem, all recorded with dates and witnesses. And I can connect every single one to Silas Crow. That notebook doesn't prove anything. It proves enough. Clara met his eyes. And if you won't investigate, I'll take this to Helena myself. I'll find someone who cares about justice more than protecting their cousin. Dawson stood up slowly. You're playing a dangerous game, Mrs. Bennett. I'm playing the only game I know how to play. The one where I don't let bullies win just because they're powerful. For a moment, Clara thought Dawson might actually do something. Arrest her, threaten her, throw them all out. Instead, he sat back down and picked up his coffee. I'll look into the fire, he said dismissively. But don't expect results. Evidence gets lost. Witnesses forget things. That's just how it works out here. Wade's hands curled into fists. Samuel put a hand on his arm, holding him back. They left the sheriff's office and stood on the street outside, breathing hard. That went about as well as expected, Pete muttered. Worse, Samuel said. Dawson's not even pretending to care. Wade was staring down the street towards something Clara couldn't see. Crow's Ranch is 10 miles north of here. Wade, no. Clara grabbed his arm. That's exactly what he wants. You ride up there angry. You give him an excuse to shoot you for trespassing. I don't care anymore. Yes, you do. You care because if you're dead, he wins. He gets Black Ridge, he gets rid of the threat, and everything we've worked for is gone. Clara stepped in front of him, forcing him to look at her. Wade, please, we're so close. Webb's testimony, the shipping records, the witnesses we've gathered, we have everything we need. We just need to hold on a little longer. A little longer, Wade repeated bitterly. How much more do we have to lose before a little longer becomes too late? Clara didn't have an answer for that. They returned to Black Ridge in silence. The smoking ruins of the barn looked even worse in daylight. Clara could see the full extent of the damage. The equipment destroyed, the supplies burned, the months of work reduced to nothing. Wade stood in the middle of it all, hands in his pockets, staring at the wreckage. Boss? Samuel approached carefully. What do you want us to do? Wade didn't answer for a long moment. Then he said, Start clearing the debris. See what we can salvage, and double the watch tonight. If Crow's men come back, I want to know about it before they strike a match. You got it. Samuel and Pete headed off to start work. Clara stayed with Wade. Are you all right? She asked quietly. No. Wade turned to look at her. But I will be, once Crow pays for this. Wade, I'm not going to do anything stupid. I know you're right about that. But I need you to promise me something. What? When we take Crow down, and we will take him down, I get to be there. I get to watch his face when he realizes he lost. Clara nodded. I promise. They stood together in the ruins, and Clara tried not to think about how close they'd come to losing everything, how close they still were. Word of the fire spread through Dry Creek faster than the flames had spread through the barn. By midday, people were talking. Some expressed sympathy. Others said Wade had brought it on himself by making trouble. A few suggested Clara was bad luck, that everything had been fine until she arrived. Margaret Sutton was particularly vocal. I told you that woman was trouble. Now look what's happened. Wade Bennett's lost his barn because he married a scandal from back east. But something else happened too. Something Clara hadn't expected. That afternoon, while she was at the schoolhouse trying to pretend everything was normal, Thomas Whitfield showed up. He wasn't alone. He'd brought James Patterson and two other former ranchers, men who'd lost their land to Crow and had been too scared to speak up. Mrs. Bennett, Thomas said, we heard about the fire. Clara set down the chalk she'd been using. Her hands were still shaking. News travels fast. It does. And we've been talking, the four of us. Thomas glanced at the other men. We can't let this stand. What do you mean? We mean we're ready to testify about what Crow did to us, about the shipping manipulation, the sabotage, all of it. Patterson stepped forward. We've been cowards, sitting back while Crow destroyed anyone who stood up to him. But you and Wade, you didn't sit back, and now you're paying for it. So we're going to help, another man said. His name was David Chen, and he'd lost his ranch 2 years ago. Whatever you need, testimony, documentation, witnesses, we're in. Clara felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked them back. You understand what you're risking. Crow will retaliate. Let him try, Thomas said. We've already lost everything once. We're not afraid of losing it again, but at least this time we'll be fighting back. The fourth man, Robert Hayes, pulled out a stack of papers. I kept records too. Every suspicious incident on my ranch before I had to sell. Every delayed shipment, every missing payment, every excuse the railroad gave me. It's all here. Clara took the papers with shaking hands. Why now? Why are you willing to help now when you wouldn't before? Because you didn't give up, Thomas said simply. Everyone told you to. The whole town said you'd run back east within a month. But you stayed. You opened that school. You stood up to Crow even when it put you in danger. You showed us what courage looks like. Clara couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They spilled down her cheeks, and she didn't bother wiping them away. Thank you. Don't thank us yet. We haven't won anything. Thomas managed a small smile. But at least now we're fighting. That evening, Clara returned to Black Ridge with a convoy. Thomas, Patterson, Chen, and Hayes followed her wagon in their own. When they arrived, Wade was in the middle of the burned barn, hauling out twisted metal. He looked up, confused, when 5 wagons rolled into his yard. What's going on? Reinforcements, Clara said. The men climbed down and introduced themselves. They told Wade they were ready to testify, ready to stand against Crow, ready to help rebuild what had been destroyed. Wade listened in silence. When they finished, he said, "You know this is going to get ugly." "We know," Thomas said. "We're prepared for ugly. Crow's going to come after all of us. Not just me anymore. All of us." "Good," Patterson said. "Let him come. He's used to fighting one person at a time. Let's see how he handles all of us together." Wade looked at Clara. She saw the question in his eyes. "Did you do this?" She shook her head slightly. "They did it themselves." "All right then," Wade said. "First thing we need to do is document everything, every piece of evidence, every witness statement, every suspicious incident. We're going to build a case so strong that even the railroad company can't ignore it." They worked through the night, Clara writing everything down while the men recounted their stories. Wade adding his own evidence: the cut fences, the poisoned water, the burned barn. Samuel and Pete contributing what they'd witnessed. By dawn, they had a document nearly 50 pages long detailing 3 years of systematic land theft and sabotage. "This is good," Wade said, flipping through the pages. "But we need someone to present it to, someone with authority." "Federal Marshal," Thomas suggested. "There's one based in Helena, handles territorial disputes and railroad issues." "Will he listen to us?" "Only one way to find out." Wade looked around the table at the exhausted men. "I'll ride to Helena tomorrow. Present the case myself." "We'll come with you," Patterson said. "All of you?" "All of us. Crow's expecting you to be isolated. Let's show him he's wrong." They decided to leave in 2 days, time enough to prepare the presentation and get their affairs in order. Clara would stay at Black Ridge with Samuel and Pete to keep the ranch running and the school open. Wade wasn't happy about leaving her. "Crow might see this as an opportunity. With me gone, you're vulnerable." "I'll be fine. Samuel and Pete will be here, and I've got the shotgun you taught me to use." "You fired it exactly twice, and you missed both times." "Third time's the charm." Wade didn't smile. "Clara, I'm serious. If anything happens, nothing's going to happen. You'll ride to Helena, present the case, and come back with federal support. Then we take down Crow properly." Wade pulled her aside, away from the others. "If this works, if the marshal actually listens and decides to investigate, Crow's going to know we're the ones who turned him in. He's going to come after us with everything he has." "I know." "And you're still willing to do this?" Clara thought about a crying woman who'd stepped off the train in Dry Creek 3 months ago. Terrified, broken, convinced her life was over. That woman wouldn't have recognized who Clara had become. Someone who faced down sheriffs and cattle barons. Someone who built schools and gathered witnesses. Someone who fought back. "I'm willing," she said. Wade kissed her. It was quick and hard and tasted like smoke and desperation. When he pulled back, he said, "When this is over, I'm building you the biggest barn in Montana Territory. I don't need a big barn. I need you to come home alive." "I'll do my best." They left at dawn on Thursday. 6 men on horseback, riding toward Helena with evidence that could destroy the most powerful man in the territory. Clara watched them disappear over the horizon and tried not to think about all the things that could go wrong. Samuel came to stand beside her. "They'll be all right. Wade's tough, and he's not alone." "I know, but Crow's tougher, and he's definitely not alone." "Maybe, but Crow's used to people being scared of him. Those men aren't scared anymore. That changes things." Clara hoped he was right. The first day passed quietly. Clara taught classes, worked on the ranch, tried to keep busy. The second day was the same. By the third day, she was climbing the walls with anxiety. Where was Wade? Had they reached Helena? Had the marshal listened? Or had Crow somehow stopped them before they even arrived? The answer came on the 4th day, but not in the way Clara expected. She was at the schoolhouse, teaching a lesson on grammar, when Margaret Sutton burst through the door. "Mrs. Bennett, you need to come quickly." Clara's heart stopped. "What happened?" "There's trouble at your ranch. Someone saw smoke." Clara was running before Margaret finished speaking. She left the children with Margaret, who looked shocked to be trusted with them, and ran the mile back to Black Ridge as fast as her legs could carry her. But when she arrived, there was no fire. The ranch was intact. Samuel and Pete were standing in the yard looking confused. "What's wrong?" Clara gasped, out of breath. "Margaret said there was smoke." "There's no smoke," Samuel said. "We've been here all day. Nothing's happened." Clara turned around slowly, looked back toward town. realized with cold certainty what had just occurred. It was a trick to get me away from the school. She ran back toward town, but she already knew she was too late. By the time she reached the schoolhouse, the building was empty. Not just empty of children, Margaret had gotten them all safely out. Empty of everything Clara had built over the past 2 months. Her books were gone. Her teaching materials. Her carefully organized records of Crow's crimes. Even the school supplies parents had donated. Everything had been taken, and in the middle of the floor, someone had left a note. Stop asking questions, stop teaching lies, stop causing trouble, or next time it won't be your books that burn. Clara stood in the empty schoolhouse and felt rage so pure it made her hands shake. This was what Crow did. He didn't just attack property, he attacked hope. He found what you cared about and destroyed it to remind you that he could take anything, anytime. But he'd made a mistake. He thought taking her school supplies would break her. He thought threatening her would make her stop. He was wrong. Clara walked back to Black Ridge, got the copies of her crime documentation. She'd hidden duplicates in 3 different locations because she wasn't stupid, and started rewriting everything from memory. Every witness statement, every piece of evidence, every connection between Crow and the destroyed ranches. Samuel found her working by lamplight well past midnight. "Mrs. Bennett, you should rest. I'll rest when Crow's in prison." Clara didn't look up from her writing. "He thinks he can scare me by stealing books and leaving threats. He doesn't understand that I've already survived worse than anything he can do to me. Still, you need sleep. I need Wade to come back with good news." Clara set down her pen. "How long does it take to ride to Helena and back?" 5 days, maybe 6 if the marshal needs time to review the evidence. It's been 4 days. Then they should be back soon. Clara wanted to believe that, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had gone wrong. That Crow had somehow reached Wade before he could reach the marshal. That the men riding to Helena weren't coming back. She was still awake when she heard the horses. It was nearly dawn, that gray time when the world is caught between night and day. Clara had fallen asleep at the table, her head on her arms, surrounded by papers. The sound of hoofbeats woke her. She ran outside, her heart pounding. 6 riders crested the hill. Wade was in front, and even from a distance, Clara could see he was smiling. She met him at the gate. He swung down from his horse and caught her in his arms. "We did it," he said against her hair. "Marshal's coming. He's bringing federal investigators. He's going to examine the railroad records, interview witnesses, the whole thing. Crow's finished." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Truly?" "Truly." Wade was grinning. "The marshal said this is the most comprehensive case of land fraud he's seen in 20 years. He's been looking for an excuse to investigate Crow for ages. We just gave him the ammunition he needed." The other men were dismounting, all talking at once. They'd been successful. The marshal had listened. Federal authority was coming to Dry Creek. Clara felt dizzy with relief. "When?" 2 weeks. The marshal needs time to gather his people and coordinate with the railroad company. But he's coming. And when he does, Crow's empire collapses. 2 weeks. Clara leaned against Wade. "We have to survive 2 more weeks." "We'll survive." Wade's arms tightened around her. "We've come this far. We're not giving up now." Clara wanted to believe him, but she couldn't stop thinking about the empty schoolhouse, the threatening note, the way Crow had stolen her books like he was trying to erase what she'd built. She didn't tell Wade about it, not yet. He was too happy, too relieved. She'd tell him later when the celebration died down. But that night, alone in the bedroom, Clara looked out at the dark Montana sky and whispered a promise to herself. 2 more weeks. They just had to survive 2 more weeks. And then Silas Crow would finally pay for everything he'd done. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. 3 families showed up at Black Ridge Ranch with lumber, tools, and determination. "Heard your barn burned down," one of the men said. "Figured you could use help rebuilding." Clara stared at them. These were people who'd avoided her for months. People who'd whispered about her at the general store. People who'd treated her like she was contaminated. "Why?" she asked. "Because you opened that school for our kids. Because you didn't run when things got hard. Because—" The man shifted uncomfortably. "Because we should have helped sooner. We were scared. But you weren't. And that matters." They spent 3 days rebuilding. Not a fancy barn. They didn't have materials for that. But something functional. something that would keep the animals safe and the equipment dry. While they worked, more people came. Women brought food, children helped carry supplies. Even Margaret Sutton showed up with blankets she'd knitted. "I still think you're trouble," Margaret said, handing the blankets to Clara. "But I respect that you didn't break. Most women would have run home to their mothers by now." "I don't have a mother to run home to," Clara said. "Well, then I suppose you had to be tough." Margaret sniffed. "The school supplies that were stolen? I'm organizing a collection. Everyone's going to donate what they can. You'll have books again by next week." Clara felt her throat tighten. "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Just keep teaching. My granddaughter's learned more from you in 2 months than she learned in 2 years before that." Margaret turned to leave, then stopped. "Mrs. Bennett? I'm sorry for the way I treated you when you first arrived. I judged you without knowing you. That was wrong." "Margaret, let me finish. You're stronger than I gave you credit for. This town's lucky to have you." She paused. "Wade Bennett's lucky to have you, too, though I'm sure he's too stubborn to say it." She left before Clara could respond. By the end of the week, the new barn was standing. It wasn't pretty, but it was solid, and Clara had a classroom full of donated supplies waiting for her to reopen the school. Wade found her sitting on the schoolhouse steps that evening, staring at the boxes of books and papers. "You all right?" "I don't know." Clara gestured at the supplies. "A week ago, these people wouldn't even speak to me. Now they're rebuilding our barn and donating to the school. I don't understand what changed." "You changed." Wade sat down beside her. "When you first arrived, you were the crying bride from the train station. Someone weak, someone temporary. But you proved them wrong. You stayed. You fought. You built something they couldn't ignore. People respect that." "I didn't do it for respect." "I know. That's why it matters." Wade took her hand. "Clara, I need to tell you something." She looked at him, worried by his tone. "What?" "After the marshal agreed to investigate, he pulled me aside, asked me questions about you, about your background, about why you came to Montana." Clara's stomach dropped. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you were fleeing a scandal back east, that a powerful man had destroyed your reputation because you rejected his advances." Wade squeezed her hand. He said it might be a problem, that Crow's lawyers could use your past to discredit your testimony. Of course they could. That's what powerful men do. They destroy the credibility of anyone who threatens them. But then the marshal said something interesting. He said that if multiple witnesses corroborate your story, if it's not just you making accusations but a whole community backing you up, then your past becomes irrelevant. Because it's not just your word against Crows anymore, it's everyone's word. Clara understood what Wade was saying. The people who showed up to rebuild the barn, the donations for the school, they're not just being kind, they're taking a side. They're taking our side, and that's what's going to protect us when Crow tries to fight back. Clara leaned against Wade's shoulder. 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks, he agreed. Then it's over. But over the next few days, Clara started to notice things. Small things that made her uneasy. Strangers in town who asked too many questions. Men watching the ranch from the hills. Conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. Crow knew something was happening. He didn't know what yet. The marshal had sworn everyone to secrecy, but he sensed danger. And a cornered animal was the most dangerous kind. On the 10th day, Samuel came running to the house just after dawn. "Boss, Mrs. Bennett, you need to see this." They followed him to the north pasture. Someone had cut down a section of fence during the night. But this time, they hadn't stolen cattle. They'd left something instead. A crude wooden sign driven into the ground with an axe. "Federal marshals can't save you. Leave while you still can." Wade ripped the sign out of the ground and threw it as hard as he could. It spun through the air and landed in the grass 20 feet away. 4 more days, he said through clenched teeth. "That's all we need. 4 more days until the marshal arrives." "What if Crow moves before then?" Clara asked. "What if he realizes we're about to expose him and decides to eliminate the threat permanently? Then we'll be ready." But they weren't ready for what came next. That night, Silas Crow himself rode up to Black Ridge Ranch. He came alone, which was somehow more terrifying than if he'd brought an army. He sat on his horse at the gate, made no move to dismount, and waited for Wade to come out. Wade grabbed his rifle. Clara grabbed his arm. Don't. That's what he wants. An excuse to claim self-defense. I'm not just going to stand here while he... We'll both go. We'll talk. But we keep our heads. Clara looked at him. Please. Wade set down the rifle. They walked out together to meet Silas Crow. Up close, Crow was a broad man in his 50s with gray hair and cold eyes. He looked at Clara with something between curiosity and contempt. So you're the bride who caused all this trouble, Crow said. I expected someone more impressive. I'm sorry to disappoint you, Clara said evenly. Mr. Crow, Wade said, you're on my property uninvited. State your business or leave. My business is simple. I'm here to make you an offer. Crow's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'll buy Black Ridge Ranch. Double what it's worth. Cash payment. You and your wife can take the money and leave Montana Territory. Start over somewhere else. Somewhere people don't know your history. Clara felt her blood run cold. He knows. He knows about Helena, about the marshal, about everything. Black Ridge is not for sale, Wade said. Everything's for sale. It's just a matter of price. Crow leaned forward in his saddle. I know you've been to Helena. I know you've been gathering witnesses, building a case. Very clever, but it won't work. The federal marshal disagrees. The federal marshal is making a mistake, and when he realizes it, you'll have nothing. No evidence, no witnesses, no ranch, no future. Crow's voice dropped. But if you take my offer now, you walk away with your lives and enough money to build something new. That's generous, Bennett. More generous than you deserve. We're not interested, Clara said. Crow turned his attention to her. Mrs. Bennett, I've done some research on you. Philadelphia society can be quite talkative when properly motivated. They remember you. They remember the scandal. They remember you attacking an innocent young man. That's a lie. Is it? Or is that what you tell yourself to justify your actions? Crow's smile widened. My lawyers are very good, Mrs. Bennett. If this goes to trial, they'll dig up every detail of your past. They'll parade witnesses who'll testify that you were unstable, violent, a woman of loose morals who came west to escape the consequences of her behavior. By the time they're done, no one will believe a word you say. Clara forced herself to stay calm. You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to save you, because if you don't take this deal, I will destroy you, not just your reputation. That's already gone. I'll destroy everything you've built here. The school will close. The people who've supported you will turn against you, and your husband will lose his ranch anyway. The only difference is that instead of walking away with money, you'll walk away with nothing. Wade stepped forward. Get off my property. I'm giving you until tomorrow night. After that, the offer expires. Crow turned his horse around. Think carefully, Bennett. Some battles aren't worth fighting. He rode away, and Clara and Wade stood in silence until he disappeared over the hill. He knows, Clara said finally. About the marshal, about the investigation, everything. Doesn't matter. The marshal's coming in 4 days. Crow can threaten all he wants, but once federal authorities start investigating, he can't stop it. Can't he? Clara turned to Wade. What if he's right? What if his lawyers really can discredit me? Make it look like I'm just a vindictive woman with a history of false accusations? Then we make sure you're not the only one testifying. We've got Thomas, Patterson, Chen, Hayes, Webb, all of them backing up your story. Crow can't discredit everyone. Clara wanted to believe that, but she'd seen how powerful men operated. They didn't just destroy one person. They destroyed everyone around that person, made examples of them, ensured no one else dared to speak up. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed listening to Wade breathe and thinking about Crow's offer. Double what the ranch was worth. Enough money to start over somewhere far from Montana, somewhere no one knew about Philadelphia or Dry Creek or any of it. It would be so easy to say yes, to take the money and run, to let Crow win. But then she thought about the children she taught, the families who'd donated supplies, the men who'd been brave enough to testify. If she ran now, she'd be abandoning all of them. And she'd promised herself in Philadelphia that she was done running. 3 days until the marshal arrived. 3 days to hold their ground. 3 days to prove that Silas Crow didn't own everything and everyone in Montana Territory. Clara got out of bed and went to the window. Outside, the moon was bright enough to cast shadows. She could see the new barn, the corrals, the land stretching away into darkness. This was home now. Not because it was perfect, not because it was easy, but because she'd fought for it, bled for it, built something from nothing despite everyone saying she couldn't. And she wasn't giving it up. Not to Crow, not to anyone. 3 more days, they just had to survive 3 more days. The final 3 days felt like holding your breath underwater. Every sound made Clara jump. Every rider on the horizon could be Crow's men coming to finish what they'd started. Wade barely slept, spending most nights sitting on the porch with his rifle across his lap, watching the darkness. On the second day, Arthur Webb showed up at Black Ridge looking pale and shaken. "They came to the station," he said without preamble. "2 of Crow's men. They didn't threaten me directly, just stood there watching while I worked, making sure I knew they were watching." "Did they say anything?" Wade asked. "One of them asked if I'd taken any trips lately, if I'd been to Helena for any reason." I lied. Said I hadn't left Dry Creek in months. Webb's hands were trembling. "But they know. Somehow they know I testified." "Crow's guessing," Clara said. "He knows someone talked, but he doesn't know who. He's trying to scare all the potential witnesses into silence before the marshal arrives." "It's working." Webb sank into a chair. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm not sure I can go through with this. I've got a wife, 3 children. If Crow comes after my family—" "He won't." Wade's voice was hard. "The marshal arrives tomorrow. Once federal investigators are here, Crow can't touch anyone without exposing himself. You just have to hold on 1 more day." Webb looked like he wanted to believe that. He left an hour later, still shaking. That night, Samuel came to the house with news that made everything worse. "Boss, I just heard from Tommy Briggs." "Yeah, I know, not the most reliable source, but he says Crow's been hiring men, gunslingers from out of territory. At least a dozen of them arrived in Dry Creek yesterday." Wade swore. "He's planning something, for tomorrow probably, before the marshal gets here." "What can we do?" Clara asked. "We get everyone who's willing to testify, and we bring them here. Tonight, all of them under one roof where we can protect them." Wade stood up. "Samuel, ride to Thomas Whitfield's place. Then Patterson, Chen, and Hayes. Tell them to pack light and get to Black Ridge as fast as they can. Pete, you ride to town and warn Webb." "What about the other families?" Clara asked. "The ones who helped rebuild the barn." "We can't protect everyone, but we can protect the witnesses." Wade grabbed his rifle. "And tomorrow, when the marshal arrives, this is all over." They came in the dark, 5 men and their families arriving at Black Ridge Ranch in wagons and on horseback. Thomas Whitfield brought his wife and daughter. Patterson came alone. Chen brought his elderly mother. Hayes had his 2 sons with him. Webb arrived last, his family huddled together in the wagon like refugees. Clara helped the women and children settle in the house while Wade organized the men outside. By midnight, Black Ridge Ranch looked like a small fortress. Armed men watching the perimeter, families sleeping in shifts, everyone on edge waiting for dawn. Clara found Wade on the porch around 2 in the morning. He was staring out at the darkness, his rifle resting against his shoulder. "Can't sleep?" she asked. "Don't want to. If Crow's going to move, it'll be tonight, before sunrise, before the marshal arrives." Wade glanced at her. "You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be long." "So will tonight, if I'm lying awake worrying." Clara sat down beside him. "Wade, if this goes wrong, if Crow somehow stops the marshal or makes the evidence disappear, or it won't go wrong. But if it does, Clara." Wade turned to face her. "If it goes wrong, we'll figure something else out. We'll run if we have to. We'll start over somewhere else. But we're not giving up. Not after coming this far." Clara wanted to ask him when exactly they'd become we, instead of 2 separate people bound by a marriage of convenience. Wanted to ask when his fight had become hers and hers had become his. But she already knew the answer. It had happened gradually in 100 small moments. Wade defending her to Tommy Briggs, Clara organizing his books, both of them standing together against Crow. They'd become partners without even realizing it. "I'm glad I got on that train," Clara said quietly. "Even with everything that's happened, even with Crow and the fire and all of it. I'm glad I came here." Wade's expression softened. "Yeah, I'm glad you did too." They sat in silence, watching the stars and waiting for whatever morning would bring. The attack didn't come. Dawn broke cold and clear, and there were no gunmen on the horizon. No fires, no sabotage. Just an ordinary Montana morning that felt anything but ordinary. "Why hasn't Crow moved?" Patterson wondered over breakfast. He's got to know we're all here. He's got to know the marshal's coming today. Maybe he's waiting to see if the marshal actually shows up, Thomas suggested. Or maybe he's planning something we haven't thought of. Or maybe, Clara said slowly, he's already planned it. And we're about to walk right into it. Everyone turned to look at her. Think about it, Clara continued. Crow knows we have evidence. He knows we have witnesses. He's had days to prepare a defense. What if he's not trying to stop the investigation? What if he's trying to control it? How do you control a federal investigation? Wade asked. By making sure the investigators only see what you want them to see. By having your own witnesses ready. By turning the whole thing into a he said, she said situation where nothing can be proven definitively. Clara stood up, pacing. Crow's a businessman. He doesn't fight battles he can't win. So if he's not fighting to stop the marshal from coming, it's because he thinks he can win even with the marshal here. The men exchanged uneasy glances. So what do? Webb asked. We stick to the truth. We present our evidence. We testify honestly. And we trust that the truth is stronger than whatever lies Crow's prepared. Clara looked around the table. But we have to be ready for him to fight dirty, to attack our credibility, to make this personal. Wade nodded slowly. She's right. Crow's going to come at us with everything. We need to stay united. If he can divide us, make any of us look unreliable, the whole case falls apart. The marshal was scheduled to arrive at noon. They spent the morning preparing, reviewing testimony, organizing documents, making sure every piece of evidence was accounted for. Clara went through her notebook one more time, checking dates and details. Everything had to be perfect. At 11:30, someone spotted riders approaching from the south. 8 men on horseback, moving at a steady pace. The lead rider carried a federal badge that caught the sunlight. Marshal James Hartley was a tall man with iron gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. He dismounted at Black Ridge Ranch and surveyed the assembled group with interest. Mr. Bennett, he said, shaking Wade's hand. Quite a gathering you've got here. These are the witnesses I told you about, Marshal. Everyone who's willing to testify about Silas Crow's land fraud and railroad manipulation. Hartley nodded to the group. I appreciate your cooperation. My investigators and I will need to interview each of you individually. We'll also need to examine all physical evidence and visit the train station to review the shipping records. He paused. I should warn you, Silas Crow has already contacted my office. He's aware of the investigation and he's retained legal representation. This is going to be a formal process with both sides presenting their case. We expected that, Clara said. Hartley looked at her. You must be Mrs. Bennett. Mr. Bennett mentioned your role in documenting the evidence. That's correct? I'll want to speak with you first, if that's acceptable. Your documentation will form the backbone of our investigation. They set up in the house, Hartley and his lead investigator at the kitchen table, Clara across from them with her notebook and all the supporting documents spread out. Wade wanted to stay, but Hartley insisted on interviewing witnesses separately to ensure independent testimony. For 3 hours, Clara walked Hartley through everything, every shipping irregularity, every suspicious incident, every connection between Crow and the destroyed ranches. Hartley listened without interrupting, taking notes in a neat, precise hand. When she finished, he sat back and studied her. Mrs. Bennett, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I need an honest answer. Did you fabricate any of this evidence? Clara felt her stomach drop. No, absolutely not. Have you altered any documents or exaggerated any claims? No, everything in that notebook is exactly as it happened, recorded as accurately as I could manage. And you understand that Mr. Crow's lawyers are going to argue that you have a history of making false accusations? That you fled Philadelphia after attacking an innocent man? There it was. The attack Clara had been expecting. That's not what happened in Philadelphia. I know. Hartley's expression didn't change. I had my office do some checking. The man who accused you, Gerald Whitfield, has a history of similar incidents. 3 other women have made complaints about him over the past 5 years. None were taken seriously because of his family's influence. Clara stared at him. You investigated my past? I investigate everyone involved in my cases. It's standard procedure. Hartley tapped his notes. Mrs. Bennett, Crow's lawyers are going to try to destroy your credibility. They're going to paint you as an unstable woman seeking revenge against powerful men. But here's what they don't know. I've seen this pattern before. Men like Crow and Whitfield operate the same way. They use power and money to avoid consequences, and they rely on their victims being too afraid or too discredited to fight back. So you believe me? I believe the evidence, and the evidence supports your account. Hartley closed his notebook. But I need you to be prepared for what's coming. Crow's not going to go down easy, and when he attacks, he's going to attack you specifically because you're the one who organized this whole case. I can handle it? I hope so. Because if you break under pressure, if you change your story or appear unreliable in any way, it compromises everything. Clara met his eyes. Marshall Hartley, I survived 3 months of public humiliation in Philadelphia. I survived traveling across the country alone. I survived arriving in a town where everyone thought I was worthless. I'm still here, still fighting. Silas Crow doesn't scare me. Hartley smiled slightly. Good. I'm counting on that. He interviewed the other witnesses throughout the afternoon. Thomas, Patterson, Chen, Hayes, Webb, all telling their stories, all providing documentation, all pointing to the same conclusion. Silas Crow had systematically destroyed anyone who stood in his way. By evening, Hartley had everything he needed to begin a formal investigation. He gathered everyone in the main room of the house. Based on the testimony and evidence presented today, I'm opening an official federal investigation into Silas Crow for land fraud, railroad manipulation, and conspiracy to commit arson. My investigators will remain in Dry Creek for the next 2 weeks conducting interviews and examining records. Mr. Crow has been notified and will have the opportunity to respond to all allegations. Hartley paused. I want to be clear, this is just the beginning. Building a case strong enough for prosecution takes time, months, possibly. You all need to be prepared for a long fight. We're prepared, Wade said. Good, because Crow's going to retaliate. Not physically, he's too smart for that with federal investigators watching. But he'll use every legal and social weapon he has to discredit you. Stay strong, stay united, and don't give him any ammunition to use against you. Hartley and his men rode back to Dry Creek to set up their base of operations at the boarding house. The witnesses gradually dispersed, returning to their homes now that the initial danger had passed. By nightfall, it was just Wade, Clara, Samuel, and Pete at Black Ridge Ranch. It's not over, Wade said, standing on the porch and watching the sunset. Hartley's right. This is just the beginning. But it's progress, Clara said. Real progress. Crow can't make this disappear now. Too many people know. Too many officials are involved. He's going to come after you specifically. You heard Hartley. Let him try. Wade pulled her close. You're either incredibly brave or completely insane. Can't I be both? He laughed, and Clara realized it was the first time she'd heard him really laugh in weeks. The sound of it made something warm bloom in her chest. The retaliation started the next day, but it didn't come from Crow directly. It came from the people Clara had thought were finally starting to accept her. Margaret Sutton showed up at the schoolhouse first thing in the morning. Mrs. Bennett, I need to speak with you about the school. Clara looked up from organizing the morning lesson. What about it? Several parents have expressed concerns about you continuing to teach their children, given the situation with Mr. Crow and all these legal troubles. What situation? I'm cooperating with a federal investigation. That's called being a law-abiding citizen. Some people are saying you've stirred up trouble, that things were fine before you arrived, and now the whole town is in chaos. Clara set down her book carefully. Things weren't fine, Margaret. They were quiet. There's a difference. People were losing their homes and their livelihoods, but as long as it was happening quietly, everyone pretended it was normal. That may be true, but parents are worried about their children being associated with someone who's making enemies of powerful people. Someone has to stand up to powerful people when they're doing wrong. Would you prefer I'd stayed silent? Let Crow keep destroying families? Margaret looked uncomfortable. I'm just telling you what people are saying. And I'm telling you that if parents want to pull their children from my school, they're welcome to do so. But I'm not apologizing for doing the right thing. 3 families pulled their children that day. Clara taught the remaining students with a smile on her face and tears burning behind her eyes. She'd known this would happen, had expected it even, but it still hurt to see people she'd helped turn their backs on her. At the general store, Henry Tucker was noticeably cold. Mrs. Bennett, your account is current, so I'll fill your order. But I should mention that several customers have suggested they'll take their business elsewhere if I continue to serve people who are causing trouble for Mr. Crow. Mr. Crow is under federal investigation for multiple crimes. But yes, I'm the problem. Tucker had the grace to look ashamed. I'm just trying to keep my business running. Of course you are. Everyone's just trying to survive. That's what Crow counts on. That people will choose safety over justice every single time. Clara took her supplies and left, her head high despite the stares from other customers. The hardest blow came from Thomas Whitfield. He showed up at Black Ridge that evening, looking defeated. I'm withdrawing my testimony, he said without meeting Wade's eyes. Crow's lawyers contacted me today. They've threatened to sue me for defamation, said they'll take everything I have left if I continue to make accusations against their client. Thomas, you can't let them intimidate you, Clara said. The marshal has your testimony recorded. The investigation is already moving forward. And Crow's lawyers say they'll make sure I never work again in Montana territory, that they'll spread rumors about me being an unreliable witness, that they'll... Thomas's voice broke. Mrs. Bennett, I'm sorry, but I've already lost everything once. I can't do it again. He left before they could argue further. Over the next 3 days, 2 more witnesses withdrew their testimony. The community pressure was immense. Anyone associated with the case against Crow was being ostracized, threatened, economically punished. It was exactly the campaign of intimidation Clara had feared. Wade found her sitting on the schoolhouse steps one evening, staring at nothing. How many students do you have left? He asked. 8. Down from 23. Clara's voice was hollow. Maybe Margaret Sutton was right. Maybe I am just causing trouble. You're causing necessary trouble. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like I've made everything worse. The witnesses are backing out, the town's turning against us, and Crow's probably going to get away with everything because people are too scared to stand up to him. Wade sat down beside her. Do you remember what you told me the day after we got married? You said you couldn't go back to just existing. That being useful was how you survived. I remember. You've been useful, Clara. You've done more in 4 months than most people do in a lifetime. You exposed corruption. You built a school. You gave people hope that things could change. And now that hope is dying because I didn't think through the consequences. No, that hope is being tested, and some people are failing the test, but not everyone. Wade took her hand. Patterson's still with us. Webb's still with us. Chen and Hayes are holding strong. And there are 8 families who believe in you enough to keep their kids in your school despite the pressure. That matters. Clara leaned against his shoulder. I'm tired, Wade. I'm so tired of fighting. I know. But we're almost through this. Hartley's investigation is moving forward whether Crow likes it or not. The evidence is solid. The shipping records alone are enough to prove manipulation. We just have to hold on a little longer. How much longer? However long it takes. They sat together on the steps while the sun set over Montana, and Clara tried to find the strength to keep fighting. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source 2 weeks later. Marshal Hartley showed up at Black Ridge with news. We've been investigating the railroad company's internal records. Your station master, Mr. Webb, gave us access to files that aren't normally available to the public, and we found something interesting. What? Wade asked. Evidence of payoffs. Someone at the railroad's Helena office has been receiving regular payments from a shell company owned by Silas Crow. In exchange, they've been manipulating shipping routes, delaying deliveries, and losing paperwork for specific ranches. Clara felt her heartbeat quicken. That proves it. That proves Crow was behind the sabotage. It proves coordination between Crow and the railroad. Combined with the testimony we have, the shipping records, and the pattern of land acquisitions following these accidents, we have enough for charges. Multiple charges. Hartley smiled slightly. Mrs. Bennett, your documentation was crucial. Without it, we never would have known where to look. So what happens now? Now we arrest Silas Crow, and we shut down his entire operation. The arrest happened on a cold morning in late November. Clara watched from the schoolhouse window as federal marshals rode into town. Crow's ranch was 10 miles away, but somehow she could feel the moment they took him into custody, like a pressure valve releasing. By afternoon, everyone knew. Silas Crow, the most powerful man in the territory, the man who'd controlled land and water and trade routes for 20 years, was in federal custody facing charges of fraud, conspiracy, bribery, and half a dozen other crimes. The town of Dry Creek didn't know how to react. Some people were relieved, others were terrified of what would happen without Crow's iron grip on the economy. A few were in denial, insisting there must be some mistake. But Clara saw something else. She saw people starting to talk to each other again. Saw ranchers having conversations they'd been too afraid to have before. Saw the beginning of something that might eventually become community instead of just a collection of scared individuals. That evening, the families who'd pulled their children from school started trickling back. Not all of them, not even most of them, but enough that Clara's classroom wasn't as empty anymore. Margaret Sutton showed up last. "Mrs. Bennett, I owe you an apology. Several, actually. You were scared. Everyone was. That's not an excuse. You were scared too, but you didn't let it stop you from doing what was right." Margaret twisted her hands together. "My granddaughter wants to come back to school, if you'll have her." "Of course I'll have her. Thank you." Margaret started to leave, then turned back. "You know, when you first arrived, I thought you were the weakest thing I'd ever seen, crying at the train station like that. But I was wrong. You're the strongest person in this entire town, and I should have seen that sooner." After Margaret left, Clara sat alone in the schoolhouse and let herself cry. Not tears of sadness or fear this time. Tears of relief, of exhaustion, of the overwhelming weight of 4 months of fighting finally lifting just enough that she could breathe. The trial took place in Helena over the course of 3 weeks. Clara testified, as did Wade, Patterson, Webb, and the handful of other witnesses who'd held strong. Crow's lawyers tried everything, attacking credibility, questioning evidence, suggesting that the whole thing was a conspiracy by jealous competitors. But the paper trail was too strong. The railroad payoffs were undeniable. And Crow's own arrogance worked against him. He'd kept detailed records of every land acquisition, every deal, every manipulation. The evidence of his systematic destruction of small ranchers was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty on 14 counts. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison and ordered to pay restitution to every rancher he'd defrauded. Black Ridge Ranch would survive. So would the families who'd lost everything. It wasn't perfect justice. No amount of money could give back the years they'd lost. But it was something. Clara and Wade returned to Dry Creek as winter was setting in hard. The new barn was finished. The house had been properly weatherproofed. The school was full again, with even more students than before. Things weren't perfect, but they were getting better. One evening in early December, Wade found Clara standing on the train platform where she'd first arrived 6 months ago. She was watching the sunset, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "You all right?" he asked, just thinking about the woman who stepped off that train. How terrified she was. How broken she felt. That woman was pretty brave, getting on a train to marry a stranger in the middle of nowhere. She didn't feel brave, she felt desperate. Clara turned to look at him. But maybe that's what bravery is. Not the absence of fear, but doing what needs to be done despite it. Wade pulled her close. "For what it's worth, I'm glad that desperate woman got on the train, even if she did cry the whole time." Clara laughed. "I didn't cry the whole time, just most of it. You haven't cried in weeks. I'm starting to worry." "Don't worry, I'm saving them up for something really important." They stood together on the platform where everything had started, and Clara thought about the distance between who she'd been and who she'd become. She'd arrived in Dry Creek as someone running from her past. She was leaving, not physically, but emotionally, as someone who'd built a future worth fighting for. The train whistle sounded in the distance. Another train arriving, bringing new people with their own stories and struggles and hopes. Clara wondered if any of them were as scared as she'd been, if any of them felt as broken. She hoped that if they were, they'd find the same thing she had. Not perfect happiness, not an easy life, but something more valuable. A place where they could stop running and start building, where their past didn't define their future, where being broken wasn't the end of the story, just the beginning of a different one. Wade took her hand. "Ready to go home?" Clara looked at the train platform one more time, then back at the man who'd taken a chance on a crying bride when everyone else saw only scandal and weakness. The man who'd become her partner, her defender, her friend. "Yeah," she said, "I'm ready." They walked away from the station together, toward Black Ridge Ranch and the life they'd built through fire and fear and stubborn determination. Behind them, the train pulled into the station and new arrivals stepped onto the platform, beginning their own journeys into the unknown. And somewhere in Dry Creek, In a small schoolhouse beside the tracks, Clara's students were learning that sometimes the harshest journeys don't destroy a person. Sometimes they reveal who that person really is beneath the fear. Sometimes they lead you exactly where you need to be, even if it doesn't look anything like what you imagined. Sometimes the place where your old life ends becomes the place where your real life begins. And sometimes, just sometimes, the woman crying at the train station becomes the hero who saves an entire community. Not because she was perfect, not because she was fearless, but because she was human enough to be scared, stubborn enough to fight back, and brave enough to believe that justice was worth the cost. The Montana winter closed in around Dry Creek, cold and harsh and unforgiving. But inside Black Ridge Ranch, the fire was warm and the future was bright, and two people who'd found each other by accident discovered that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances. You just have to be brave enough, or desperate enough, to get on the train.